Chapter 761, The Unfindable Anomaly. Saul chose to track the airship's attendant, not only because he was genuinely interested in the white porcelain cat, but also for another significant reason. Crumb's death bore a striking resemblance to the merchant Mike's death. They were the only two corpses Saul had encountered within a month, leaving him with a particularly vivid impression of both. Both had drowned. A third-rank wizard had met the same fate as an ordinary person, unable to escape death's call. Moreover, both had lost their souls after death. When Saul searched for their consciousness, he had heard the sound of water in both cases. Combined with the third-level wizard apprentice Paul's warning on the airship that the white porcelain cat could cause people to drown, Saul began connecting the two deaths. Since it was approaching dusk, there were few pedestrians on the streets. The occasional passers-by were mostly wizard apprentices. These people appeared hurried and weary, like office workers. Saul felt as if he'd returned to Gorse's wizard tower. He continued concealing his aura and magical fluctuations, walking along the street's edge like an ordinary person. The guide stones Kate had left along the way were crude, but they contained no magical power. To the wizard apprentices on the street, they were just the most unremarkable stones. After walking for a short while, Saul found the attendant's residence in a small alley near the airport. It was an old but independent two-story building. Perhaps to match Sky City's overall decorative style, even this old house had been painted with tea-colored walls and sauce-colored roof ridges. This made it look less shabby. However, even so, this didn't seem like a house an attendant could afford. Saul noticed that only one living person's aura emanated from this two-story house. The attendant lived alone. Saul looked up and saw the orange cat crouched on the roof ridge. He smiled at the orange cat, then jumped directly through the half-open second-floor window. The window opened into the attendant's bedroom, where the attendant was currently tinkering with something. Despite facing the window, he seemed blind, completely oblivious to a soft body squeezing through the barely half-open window crack. After Saul entered, the orange cat followed a step behind, jumping in silently. Two beings existed openly, yet failed to attract the attendant's attention. Saul approached the attendant, who kept his head down looking at something, and suddenly pressed his hand against the back of the man's head. The attendant immediately collapsed without warning. "Lord Saul, aren't you going to interrogate him?" "Too troublesome, I'll just look directly." After speaking, Saul seemed to freeze in place. Kate glanced at him and didn't dare move carelessly. The orange cat didn't know that Saul had already entered the attendant's dreamscape. Although Saul had knocked him unconscious, with the nightmare butterfly's operation, the attendant still obediently began dreaming. His dreams were very realistic. After watching for a moment, Saul saw they mostly involved striking it rich overnight, buying an airship, and scolding those usually high-end mighty senior attendants, guards, maids, captains, and others. All these people knelt and prostrated before the attendant, kissing his toes. "Had enough fun, think about something useful now." Saul waved his hand, and the scene before him changed. The attendant returned to this room, but it was now filled with white porcelain cats. These cats' eyes were also white and hadn't been painted red. They weren't exactly the same as what Saul had seen at Merchant Mike's place. The attendant hadn't yet recovered from his pleasant dream. After being dazed for a while, he remembered where he was. However, he still maintained his earlier excitement. "Work hard, keep working hard. I'll have enough money saved to buy an airship soon." He crawled under the bed and dragged out a small bottle filled with red paint of unknown composition. He opened the bottle, dipped a brush in a small amount of paint with one hand, picked up a white porcelain cat without red eyes with the other, and carefully painted the cat's eye areas completely red. Saul noticed that, after painting the cat's eyes red, the attendant would very carefully grasp the cat's body and place it in the bedside cabinet. The cabinet already contained more than 10 white porcelain cats with red-painted eyes. Saul stepped forward and picked up a white porcelain cat without painted eyes. The dream's details told Saul these were indeed inferior craft products. He then picked up a cat with red-painted eyes. Neither the paint nor the cat showed any abnormalities. Saul even imitated Merchant Mike's actions, stroking the white porcelain cat's head. But he still felt nothing, nor did any fortunate events occur. Is it because my strength is beyond what the white porcelain cat can influence? Or is this just a dreamscape where the other party isn't their true self, unable to affect dream people and objects? Saul put the white porcelain cat back. Throughout this, the attendant showed no reaction. This isn't right either. Saul waved his hand again. If his most exciting moment isn't right, then what about his most frightening moment? The attendant's dream transformed into several scary scenarios, such as falling into water or an airship exploding. But none of these dreams contained any abnormal events. Quite clean indeed. Saul waved his hand once more. Let me see what your most unforgettable day looked like. This time, Saul and the attendant came to the street together. The streets here were unfamiliar. None of the streets Saul had passed today looked like this. The most distinctive building was a broken tower in the distance. The tower's top consisted of crumbling bricks and protruding beams. A tall boy stood beneath the broken tower, appearing 15 or 16 years old, wearing the most ordinary wizard apprentice robes with frayed edges at the bottom hem. But the attendant immediately ran over. Saul followed behind the attendant like a shadow. He heard the attendant say to the boy, "I'm almost out of goods." The boy replied expressionlessly, "You can't come to me before I find you. If this happens again, we'll terminate our cooperation." "It won't happen again, it won't happen again. I'll never seek you out on my own again." The boy didn't make things difficult for the attendant, seeming to have never had any expectations of him. "Be obedient, or I can replace you at any time." The attendant nodded repeatedly. The boy turned and left. In the end, he didn't produce anything resembling the goods the attendant had mentioned, showing considerable principle. Saul wanted to follow the boy, but since this was the attendant's dream, when the boy reached the street's edge, his figure began to blur and fade. Just as Saul was considering whether this boy was the person he sought. Gurgle, gurgle. He suddenly heard the sound of water bubbling again. In an instant, Saul's expression changed. "Found you." Saul exited the attendant's dreamscape. The attendant was still lying face down on his bed, fast asleep. "Lord Saul, did you find what you were looking for?" "I can only say I used a small shrimp to hook another small fish. It's still unclear whether this small fish is the real culprit. However, a wizard apprentice doesn't seem like someone who could control the white porcelain cats. Do you need me to search this room?" Saul shook his head. The cat's owner is extremely skilled at concealing traces. He even erases abnormal information about the white porcelain cats from people's consciousness. If it were anyone else investigating, no matter how thoroughly they searched, they'd only find that the white porcelain cats are ordinary craft items. All information related to their anomalies has been completely erased. Saul interlocked his fingers. "Interesting. Since we can't find it using high-level methods, let's use the most primitive approach." "Meow," Kate didn't understand yet. "Just like how you carved the most ordinary stones into shapes to guide me. Those who are invisible at the magical level can often be seen with the naked eye." Chapter 762, Substitute Teacher Saul. After leaving the attendant's house, night had already fallen. Saul maintained his magical fluctuations at the level of a first-rank true wizard. then found a random inn that served wizards and settled in for the night. He had originally planned to disguise himself as a wizard apprentice to approach the apprentice boy who had appeared in the attendant's dream. However, he discovered that wizard apprentices seemed to have rather low status in Sky City. Unlike Stat Continent, where ordinary people were everywhere, Sky City itself was a giant magical construct. Regular people truly couldn't live here easily. The places available for ordinary people were limited to 2 remote alleys. Most residents there were ordinary people like attendants who worked at the airport. Wizard apprentices here were actually forbidden from staying at inns. There were special apprentice dormitories provided for apprentice housing. Whether you were a local apprentice or not, coming here meant you could only stay in designated places. Money didn't matter. The rank restrictions were extremely strict. Only true wizards had it somewhat better. At minimum, they weren't assigned specific living quarters, though they still couldn't enter areas near the White Glass Palace. The inn where Saul stayed was quite ordinary, showing no special treatment for wizards whatsoever. Fortunately, Saul wasn't someone who pursued luxury. He casually booked a single room and mediated directly until dawn. Early the next morning, Saul went out and, after asking several passers-by, successfully found the broken tower that had appeared in the attendant's dream. Although the wizard apprentice from the dream didn't necessarily live near the broken tower, since the attendant had come here to find someone, the other party at least appeared in this location fairly regularly. Saul's first day here yielded no results. He didn't use any magic. On the second day, he continued waiting near the broken tower and observing every person who passed by. The boy didn't keep Saul waiting too long. On the second morning, Saul saw him jogging past the broken tower. Found him. Saul walked with his hands behind his back, leisurely following behind. Even as the other party's figure grew more distant, Saul didn't quicken his pace. Just as he was about to lose track of the boy, Saul saw him enter what looked like a large auditorium. This auditorium covered considerable ground area, surrounded by squares blooming with white and pink whisper flowers. The square also had quite a few wizard apprentices, few first levels, but many second and third levels. This place was also close to the apprentices' dormitory area. Compared to the densely packed apprentice dormitories that resembled a beehive, this place was much more spacious, like a student playground. As Saul crossed the square, every apprentice who noticed him would bow their head in respect. Even those previously sitting on benches would immediately stand up. The hierarchy is quite strict. Saul walked to the auditorium entrance. Before he could enter, someone came out first. The person was a woman who appeared to be in her 40s. Although her skin remained smooth and fair, the weariness and exhaustion in her eyes couldn't be concealed. Seeing Saul, she first froze, then immediately showed a relieved smile. "You finally came. I thought you found the compensation inadequate and had already given up." Saul stopped walking. "You know who I am." The woman nodded. "Though I haven't met you before." A young first-rank wizard with an unfamiliar face appearing outside the lecture hall at this time could only be the substitute instructor we hired from off the island. Saul shrugged. "Actually, I'm still considering." The woman raised both hands. "I know our compensation is a bit low, but before you have the ability to enter the Academy of Knowledge or Academy of Practice, being an instructor at the Apprentice Academy is the most suitable transitional job." Seeing that Saul still hadn't left, the woman assumed he was tempted and simply grabbed Saul's sleeve, leading him inside. "I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm Laura, and I've been an instructor here for 27 years. Saul." "Hello, Saul. I know you're still hesitating, but you really should try it first, even if it's just substituting for one class." Laura chattered away, Third-level apprentice classes are actually quite easy to teach. They'll ask some headache-inducing stupid questions. If you really don't know the answer, just tell them directly that this isn't something they should know right now. Apprentices occasionally passed by them, but Laura brazenly continued explaining methods for dealing with apprentices. If you really have something urgent, you can also notify us to change the class to a self-study session. Of course, we won't pay class fees for those situations. Laura covered her lips with the back of her hand, appearing secretive while her voice remained loud. Of course, my suggestion is that you can come here to do your own things while the apprentices just study by themselves. Saul raised an eyebrow and nodded with apparent understanding. This Laura wizard was obviously just an employee, not the owner of this academy, much less the person responsible for paying salaries. You young people, having just become first-rank wizards, are full of ambition and don't understand how good this place is. Actually, the formal instructors here have all worked for decades like me. Although this place can't help you advance or obtain many rare resources, it can keep you alive, alive like a king. When Laura said this, she suddenly waved at an apprentice standing relatively close to her. That apprentice was immediately swept up as if hit by a hurricane, then slammed hard against the corridor wall, immediately spitting up a large mouthful of blood. The nearby apprentices were so frightened they didn't dare make a sound, all consciously standing against the walls. Laura used a completely different tone to address the apprentice who hadn't yet gotten up. "Scott, if you don't understand how to show respect to true wizards, next time I'll smash your head like a berry." The apprentice lying on the ground didn't dare get up, nor did he dare make eye contact with Laura. He could only spit blood while desperately nodding. But clearly, he had only been standing slightly closer to Laura. Saul opened his mouth, then quickly closed it, his face showing astonishment like a green instructor fresh out of training. Laura was very satisfied with Saul's reaction. She knew that normal people at this point should have changed their opinion of this poorly paid job. So she began creating a sense of urgency for Saul. Of course, if you still have other plans, that's fine too. Just substitute for these few days of classes. The instructor originally responsible for third-level apprentices went to take the Academy of Knowledge assessment. If he fails the assessment, he'll return to continue teaching. At this point, the two arrived at the innermost classroom in the corridor. This was a tiered lecture hall. It looked like it could seat over 200 people. But currently, fewer than 50 people sat in the classroom, and they were unusually scattered. 7 people sat in the very back row and didn't straighten their postures like the others when Saul and Laura entered. Laura, who had been speaking loudly all along, used secret speech technique with Saul for the first time. By the way, unless the apprentices in the back row actively ask you questions, you usually don't need to bother with them. These people either have close relatives who are true wizards or have good talent with chances to become true wizards. We generally don't manage apprentices at this stage to avoid awkwardness when we meet after they advance. Saul nodded casually. In fact, he hadn't been listening carefully to Laura's words. Because in the back row, he had spotted the wizard apprentice boy who had appeared in the attendant's dream. Chapter 763, On-Site Locator Modification. Saul signed the substitute teaching agreement on the spot, although the salary was pitifully low. After signing the substitute agreement, Laura didn't waste a single second, stuffed him with the previous instructor's lesson plan, and left. Saul walked up to the podium, casually told some apprentices who had stood up to bow to sit down, and began flipping through the lesson plan. He had never really taught anyone before. His only current apprentice was still a first-level apprentice moonlighting as a fortune teller. So he had never thought about how to conduct classes for others. However, since he had decided not to rely on magical power to approach the boy, To avoid making any anomalies on him disappear, Saul naturally needed to first close the distance between them. It would be best if he could get the boy to actively approach him. In an instant, Saul had figured out his persona, a young wizard with some ability and some arrogance, but who often lacked a bit of luck. Saul quickly read through half of the previous instructor's lesson plan and discovered they had already reached how to use compound runes to improve originally simple magic formations, making them more effective while reducing energy consumption. Most of the students below weren't paying attention to Saul's actions. They were more focused on gnawing through heavy magic books or writing their own study notes. They didn't seem to truly care what this class would cover. Saul looked at the class schedule. Third-level apprentices only had 2 classes per week, with each class lasting an entire morning. The content in this teaching plan could be taught for a year. Saul slammed the 2-finger-thick lesson plan back onto the podium with a loud bang. Several wizard apprentices sitting in the classroom jumped in fright, nervously watching the new instructor, afraid he might also pick someone he didn't like and beat them up. Here, higher-level apprentices bullying lower-level ones and instructors bullying apprentices were all too common. Some people stayed out of trouble thanks to special status or abilities, while others couldn't stand it and left. But most apprentices still remained in the large lecture hall. After all, this was the cheapest academy available. As long as they still wanted to continue advancing, these apprentices without much background could only endure the cultural environment here, then work hard and study diligently, hopping to one day advance to true wizard status. Saul's sudden book slamming startled some apprentices in the front, but the further back the apprentices sat, the smaller their reactions. Especially those in the very back row, they didn't even lift their heads, focusing intently on their own affairs. Saul's target was resting his chin on his hand, looking sideways out the window at the sky, lost in thought about something. Saul temporarily ignored them and instead braced his arms on the podium, leaning his upper body forward using a slightly higher tone than usual. "Let me introduce myself first. I'm Saul, your substitute instructor. Unless something unexpected happens, I won't be staying here long, so I'll arrange the course content myself during this period. If any of you still want to study the planned curriculum, you can come here to self-study. As long as you don't make noise, I won't care whether you listen to my classes." As soon as Saul finished speaking, everyone looked at each other, and some immediately took out other books to read. The 3 apprentices in the back row still showed no reaction. Saul remained unhurried. He snapped his left fingers, and immediately a cluster of red smoke appeared to his left side, quickly condensing into several large characters. Locator selection. Several third-level apprentices who had been watching Saul immediately widened their eyes. "I've noticed that although you've all established connections with your locators, most of your connections aren't solid." As Saul spoke, he walked down from the podium and casually grabbed an apprentice sitting in the front row, pulling him forward. Like this apprentice, who went through great effort to find a locator unsuitable for himself, then forced himself to transform to adapt to that unsuitable locator. Saul unceremoniously ripped open the apprentice's robes, exposing the chest underneath. This apprentice had a metal cylinder in the center of his chest. It was hollow, the kind you could put your hand straight through. When the outer robes were pulled away, the metal cylinder immediately emitted a woo-woo-woo whistling sound. This garbage is essentially a wind attribute locator. "Oh right, what's your name?" David, instructor. David was completely bewildered. Although third-level apprentices wouldn't be particularly nervous about carefully concealing their locators, being exposed like this in front of everyone and having it called garbage made him very upset. But stronger than his displeasure were fear and shame. Because he also knew his locator was truly garbage, with almost no possibility of advancing to true wizard status. And after other apprentices learned about this, they definitely wouldn't regard him as an equal like before. David struggled to suppress his spiritual body, preventing his agitated emotions from transmitting to his physical body and being detected by instructor Saul. Just as David was beginning to despair about his future, wondering if he should drop out like other third-level apprentices with no hope of advancement and find an ordinary job, he heard Saul's voice again. I don't know where you got this garbage locator formula from, or if the formula you obtained was incomplete to begin with. Either way, after your own modifications, it truly lives up to the name, garbage. David's head was already drooping toward his chest. But then Saul's words suddenly changed. However, you can also feel proud of yourself, because the one thing you did right was not completely ruining yourself for this garbage locator. And with some modifications, this garbage can barely be upgraded to ordinary quality. Saul snapped his fingers again, and the red character's locator selection beside him changed to compatibility. By now, except for the 3 apprentices in the back row, everyone else had raised their heads, staring intently at Saul and the nervous David, afraid to miss a single word. David, your wind attribute. Choosing metal magical materials for your locator actually restrains wind's flexibility. Saul raised his hand and actually pulled the metal cylinder directly out of David's chest. David's legs went weak and he nearly collapsed to the ground, but Saul caught him and prevented him from falling. Saul held the locator and gave it a gentle shake. The entire locator immediately split into pieces, floating in the air. Saul raised his hand and flicked lightly, directly throwing several metal components out the window. First, remove the garbage parts that can no longer be used. A seemingly unremarkable wooden board appeared in his palm, complete with scorch marks. Then replace them with more suitable materials. Oh, this lightning-struck wood is average quality, but it's not cheap either. You'll need to reimburse me with magic crystals later. David nodded numbly. He was already stunned. How did he feel like Instructor Saul seemed to be, going to modify his locator on the spot? Saul's hands worked like a precision machine, making a few cuts on the lightning-struck wood and transforming the entire board into uniformly shaped components. Under Saul's magical manipulation, these components directly formed a cylinder with a hexagonal cross-section in midair. Then Saul flicked David's original locator materials one by one into the new wooden cylinder. Then put the barely usable garbage left from your locator inside, and this becomes an ordinary quality locator. Saul directly drew micro-magic formations in the air with his hands, then inscribed them on the new locator before pushing the new locator back into David's chest. David looked down at his new locator, his face first showing terror. After all, this new one hadn't been tested at all, then transforming into delight. You might need some time to adapt. Go back and meditate. Saul pushed the dazed David back to his seat. At least now you have about a 30% chance of advancing to true wizard status. Afterward, he walked back to the podium. This time, even the 3 wizard apprentices in the back row looked at him with shock. So, can any of you tell what the truly important step was in my modification? Chapter 764, Third Level Apprentice Nathan. The tiered classroom fell silent for a minute. Saul frowned with a disappointed expression. Can't any of you understand such a simple question? Saul's words rang like a bell, jolting awake all the apprentices in the tiered classroom. Only David, who had just had his locator modified, remained seated with his eyes closed, meditating seriously. He understood this might be his only chance to advance to true wizard status. Combined with Saul's recent reminder, he naturally wouldn't be distracted by other matters. But under Saul's prompting, A third-level apprentice finally raised his hand. Instructor Saul, is it about choosing a locator suitable for oneself? Everyone knows that. Saul waved his hand dismissively, clearly not accepting this answer. Several more people subsequently provided answers, attribute matching, accommodating one's nature, but Saul kept shaking his head. At this point, the apprentice in the middle of the back row suddenly spoke up. Instructor, are you trying to say we need to clearly understand ourselves? Although the person answering wasn't Saul's target, it didn't matter. Exactly. If you can't recognize yourself clearly, then there's no point discussing compatibility or attributes. Saul briefly explained how to understand one's own attributes and know what one excels at. Of course, everyone's situation is very complex. The methods I've mentioned might not suit everyone, but this is exactly what you as wizard apprentices need to think about. If you only rigidly receive information, even cats could become wizards. Meow. Kate, perched outside the lecture hall window, felt offended. Perhaps seeing that Saul could joke around and wasn't as serious and unapproachable as other instructors, an apprentice sitting in the front row cautiously raised his hand to ask a question. Instructor, could you give more examples about how to understand ourselves? Saul walked into the aisle with his hands behind his back, pausing briefly beside the questioning apprentice, whose forehead immediately beaded with sweat. Saul thought to himself, I haven't even started intimidating you yet. He continued walking forward. I hope you genuinely want me to give an example, not use examples as a substitute for your own thinking process. If that's the case, even if you advance to true wizard status, you'll quickly develop mutations. Saul walked all the way to the back row and suddenly pointed at his target. Let me randomly choose someone for an example. What's your name? The target apprentice seemed somewhat surprised that Saul would choose him. After all, previous instructors never bothered with the apprentices in the back row. However, he still stood up. Instructor, I'm Nathan. Saul nodded, deliberately not looking at him, as if he had truly just randomly selected an apprentice. Wizard Laura already told me that the apprentices in the back row all have good prospects for advancement, so they usually don't monitor your progress. But precisely because of this, using you as an example won't interfere with your own thinking, since you've already thought through most things. Saul waved his hand. I'll examine your situation, don't resist. Without giving Nathan any chance to respond, Saul used his mental power to scan him from head to toe. Nathan appeared somewhat dazed. His expression was strange, seemingly surprised, but mixed with a hint of sudden realization. Saul noted Nathan's emotional changes in his mind. He's somewhat surprised, but it doesn't seem like surprise at being used as an example. There's also some certainty about this happening. Could he have already sensed I would do this, or sensed that today's events would occur? The white porcelain cat. Saul understood. This Nathan had probably also used the white porcelain cat's ability. So I've become his stroke of luck, or he was lucky to appear before me when I was waiting at the broken tower. No wonder Saul had encountered Nathan after only 2 days of waiting. So it was mutual attraction. Saul smiled and began following the white porcelain cat's luck, describing Nathan's situation to him. Your talent is quite good, your mental power is stable, and your magical reserves are sufficient. Your locator also suits your body quite well. Naturally, Saul couldn't reveal all of Nathan's details to others. He only explained several aspects from which Nathan could understand his own situation. All the apprentices in the classroom turned around, including the other 2 in the back row, and began taking notes. After Saul finished explaining several general methods, he waited briefly. Nathan's face showed some anxiety. Clearly, Saul's explanations were valuable, but still couldn't satisfy his needs. Saul became even more certain of his guess and continued. Your locator proves your self-understanding is sufficient, but a single but made Nathan tense up again. Your locator is very domineering, and you are too lazy. Instructor Saul, Nathan actually works very hard. The apprentice from the back row who had answered earlier spoke up for Nathan. Not enough. Saul denied the other's thoughts. I think you might be too lucky. You only tried hard a few times and got quite correct answers. This led to you getting the problems right without summarizing the true patterns contained within them. So now, you can barely suppress your locator anymore, right? Saul smiled. This time he didn't help Nathan modify his locator, but walked leisurely back to the podium with his hands behind his back. In stark contrast to Saul's relaxed demeanor were the other apprentices' shocked expressions. They all looked toward Nathan. Saul's final words clearly warned Nathan that his condition was already dangerous. Could one of the class geniuses actually be a pitiful soul about to mutate? Of course, no one dared voice their thoughts, but their occasional glances back at Nathan exposed their true intentions. Nathan clenched his fists, his face alternating between red and pale, but he explained nothing, simply sitting back down after Saul left. Although a class session lasted an entire morning, nearly 4 hours, no instructor actually lectured continuously. So after this explanation, Saul had the classroom apprentices examine themselves while forbidding them from asking questions. Saul meditated with his eyes closed while contemplating how to continue communicating with Pear from the prismatic world if he had Ophelia's help. This was obviously his true purpose for coming here. He waited until noon when he heard a special bell sound, like bird calls. Only then did he rise and leave the classroom. After Saul left, the apprentices in the classroom immediately began quietly discussing this new substitute instructor, praising his real abilities while feeling both fear and gratitude. At this moment, a middle-aged man hurried into the classroom and went straight to the back row. "Nathan, lend me some money." Nathan had originally wanted to immediately chase after Saul, but being stopped by the newcomer, his face showed delight without any impatience. "Paul, you're not following the airships anymore." Paul was the same third-level wizard apprentice who had once questioned Saul on the airship. He looked expressionless and somewhat gloomy. "There was a death on the airship, so now it's detained for investigation. I can only stay in Green Shade Alley with Mina for now." While taking out money, Nathan asked strangely, "Why does someone dying now require detaining the airship?" Paul shook his head. "I don't know either. It's just that Sky City seems to be under martial law now, easy to enter, but strict searches are required to leave." Nathan's expression shifted, though he quickly said nonchalantly, "Whatever happens, it's the big shot's business and has nothing to do with us wizard apprentices." Paul said, "Let's hope so." After leaving the lecture hall, Saul didn't immediately return to the inn. He walked around the nearby area and encountered Wizard Laura. Laura seemed to have already heard about Saul's class content from other apprentices and appeared somewhat surprised. It was rare for true wizards to lecture about locators. First, this was essentially a closely guarded skill, and second, even first-rank true wizards had limited understanding of locators. Being stumped by apprentice questions would be embarrassing. Wizard Saul is truly impressive. I think you'll be able to enter the Academy of Knowledge soon." Saul was about to respond when he suddenly detected a familiar magical fluctuation approaching, so his response became, "I hope so, but sometimes I really lack a bit of luck. Coming to Sky City this time hasn't been as smooth as I previously envisioned." He smiled bitterly. With complete sincerity. Chapter 765, Competing Acting Skills. Wizard Laura had no idea that Saul's mention of bad luck was actually meant for others to hear. She nodded understandingly. "Yes, Honestly speaking, which instructor here doesn't lack a bit of luck? First-rank wizards who served as instructors here for long periods certainly had solid fundamentals, but definitely had problems with advancement. Otherwise, how could these wizards who pursued power and knowledge truly be content teaching a group of apprentices? Laura wanted to comfort Saul, but he was already preparing to leave. At this moment, a voice called out from behind, stopping Saul. "Instructor Saul." Saul turned around and saw Nathan jogging over. Seeing it was Nathan, Laura glanced at Saul again, refreshing her impression of him for the second time. "I'll head back first." Knowing Nathan probably wanted to ask Saul questions, she took the initiative to leave. Saul watched Wizard Laura depart, then crossed his arms and looked at Nathan with an ambiguous smile. "Are you wanting to ask me how to improve your locator?" Nathan opened his mouth. Saul was right. That was exactly the question he'd come to ask. Nathan had long ago discovered the problems emerging in himself. Although he could force advancement, becoming a first-rank wizard that way would leave him in a very unstable state. So he had been suppressing himself while seeking a solution. He had even resorted to using the white porcelain cat again. Although he was the true owner of the white porcelain cat, he rarely relied on it. Up until now, Nathan had only used the white porcelain cat twice. Once when selecting his locator. The other time was yesterday, when he discovered he was already being controlled in reverse by his locator, but couldn't find a solution no matter what. Looking at Nathan, who didn't know what to say, Saul didn't actively approach him. He turned around, actually intending to leave directly. "I said before that answers can't replace your thinking process. If you're here to directly seek answers, my response is that I won't tell you." Seeing Saul was really about to leave, Nathan hurried forward and lowered his voice. "Instructor, I've really been thinking about this for a long time, almost half a year. Actually, I could have attempted advancement half a year ago, but because my locator's state was unstable, I've been delaying until now." Saul continued walking forward with an expression of, "What does that have to do with me?" Nathan couldn't help but reach forward to grab Saul's sleeve. Feeling the resistance on his arm, Saul's face turned cold as he looked down at Nathan's hand. "Don't want your hand anymore, or don't want your life." Nathan's mind suddenly echoed with Saul's conversation with Wizard Laura, and he quickly spoke before Saul could actually act. "Instructor, do you think a person's luck can increase out of thin air?" Saul stopped walking, though his expression didn't improve. "Luck, maybe, but that's not knowledge you can research. Even I can't reach that level." Nathan spoke again, now using secret speech technique. "Though this is presumptuous, Instructor Saul, have you heard of the cat's gratitude?" "Here it comes." Saul's expression shifted slightly as he said, half-truthfully, "You have one." Nathan looked around. "Instructor, let's change locations." 10 minutes later, the two arrived at a private booth in a tavern. This place only served formal wizards, so Nathan could only enter by following Saul. The booth walls had the most basic isolation magic formations, ensuring ordinary people couldn't eavesdrop on conversations inside. Even so, Nathan and Saul still used secret speech technique when communicating. "Instructor, where did you hear about it?" Saul seemed somewhat displeased, but still answered him. "On the airship coming here. I witnessed it once but couldn't get my hands on it." Nathan pressed his lips together. Saul could sense his spiritual body becoming much more relaxed. "I do indeed have one. To be honest, I bought it from an out-of-town merchant and spent a large sum of money, but it really is useful." Saul finally sat up straight. "You have one, give it to me." Nathan seemed startled by Saul's directness, appearing restless. "Instructor Saul, please don't be hasty. The cat's gratitude can't be forcibly taken, or it will actively run away." Saul leaned back with a smile tugging at his lips. Who said I was going to steal it? Whatever you paid, I'll give you double. Seeing Saul's aggressive yet greedy expression, Nathan actually breathed a sigh of relief. I don't want money, Instructor Saul. Saul nodded with understanding. You want me to help you modify your locator. Saul tapped his cheek with his index finger, considering the reliability of the other party's words. If you're lying to me, I'll kill you immediately. Nathan nodded repeatedly. I can sign a fairy contract with you. No need. Saul didn't want the white porcelain cat to become entangled with fairy contracts. To avoid bringing unknown influences, he stood up. After my next class ends, come wait for me here again. Bring your cat. Nathan smiled happily and nodded quickly. Now close your eyes and take a nap. The other party froze, his smile nearly freezing on his face. I want to carefully examine your locator again to determine the modification plan. I'll formally modify it for you during our next meeting. Saul glanced at Nathan and nearly rolled his eyes. That evening, Saul returned to the inn again. Kate had followed Saul the entire way and jumped into Saul's room through the outer wall. Lord Saul, did you find that white porcelain cat? Saul shook his head. I didn't see any anomalies in Nathan's dreamscape either. The white porcelain cat didn't even appear in his dreams. Saul was somewhat worried that Nathan also wasn't the final owner of the white porcelain cat, although he could continue following leads from Nathan. But that would be too time-consuming. In a few days, he still needed to visit the White Glass Palace and couldn't return empty-handed. Nathan told me he obtained the white porcelain cat from a merchant on an airship. The merchant was very likely Mike. At this point, Agu in the diary spoke up. Master, do you think Nathan might already know about the merchant's death? After all, he knows the attendant on the airship. Agu's words reminded Saul. Right, he might already know about the merchant's death, so he chose to push the white porcelain cat's origin onto the merchant. After all, there's no way to verify it now that he's dead. Saul smiled. This actually proves even more that he's the source of the white porcelain cat. Deliberately mentioning the merchant who was indeed connected to the white porcelain cat, combined with the attendant's dream of getting goods from Nathan, already confirmed that the other party was deeply entangled with the white porcelain cat. Ah, brother Saul, you're both such good actors. Why don't you really take him as an apprentice so your acting skills don't go to waste? Hee hee. Penny snickered in the diary. Saul gave Penny a genuine eye roll. 3 days later, Saul completed his substitute teaching assignment once again. When class ended, the third-level wizard apprentices in the classroom were already looking at him with admiring gazes. Although the knowledge Saul taught didn't exceed what a first-rank wizard should know, his understanding of knowledge reached depths that other instructors had never touched. After class, Saul still chatted briefly with Wizard Laura at the door, and only bid farewell after seeing Nathan emerge from the lecture hall. 10 minutes later, the two met again in the same tavern booth. After closing the door, Nathan stepped forward and directly placed a small cloth bag on the table. Saul glanced at Nathan and raised his hand to untie the string on the bag. The bag opened, revealing the white porcelain cat inside. A pair of eyes painted red with paint looked directly at Saul. Chapter 766, Cat Experiment. He hadn't expected Nathan to bring the white porcelain cat directly to the trade location. Do you trust me this much? Saul appeared surprised. Actually, I thought you would follow me last time and directly steal it. But not only did you not steal it, you seriously helped me think through modification plans. So I thought I'd give it to you directly to show my sincerity. Saul wasn't moved. I was just worried that forcible seizure wouldn't be effective. After all, there are often hidden rules in the wizarding world that can't be detected. He tapped his fingers on the table twice, then suddenly asked, "This cat's gratitude. Don't you have another one, or even more?" Nathan was genuinely stunned. He stammered, actually. Yes, I do have more, but this isn't something where more is better. Good luck often comes with misfortune." Saul picked up the flower wine on the table and took a sip, stopped pursuing the matter, and waved his hand to store Nathan's white porcelain cat in his storage device. Seeing this, Nathan's pupils contracted slightly, and his lips parted to reveal a small gap between his teeth, but in the end he bit down tightly and said nothing. "Then let's begin now." Saul had no intention of going back on his word. He threw the modification plan he'd casually made over the past 2 days onto the table in front of Nathan. "Look it over carefully first. If you really can't understand it, then come ask me, but keep thinking." After speaking, Saul got up and left the booth. After obtaining the white porcelain cat, Saul went straight back to the inn. He used several instruments to detect radiation from it, and found almost nothing. This matched what he had sensed through his mental power. Next, Saul was about to follow Nathan's instructions and pet the cat's head. But Herman in the diary spoke up. "Master, let me do it instead. Your rank is too high, this little cat might not affect your luck." Saul thought this made sense. This cat had previously affected the airship, indirectly helping Merchant Mike beat him. But Saul himself hadn't been affected at all. If he hadn't been paying attention to the white porcelain cat, he probably wouldn't have been able to detect its mischievous methods. Saul pulled Herman out of the diary and also grabbed the orange cat Kate, who was watching the excitement nearby. Herman has first-rank strength, but he's a spirit body bound to the diary, so he might not be able to test out the white porcelain cat's operating principles either. "So Kate, you try it too in a moment." Kate's whiskers perked up. He shuffled over to the white porcelain cat and rubbed its body with his tail. Nothing happened. Pet its head. "Actually, my state isn't very stable either. This isn't my real body after all." "But you're about to be permanently bound to it. Be good, pet its head. If you do well, I'll have someone craft you a new body." This was the first time Kate had heard Saul discuss his body situation. He asked eagerly, "Really, can you really help me switch my body back? I have rich experience in both soul extraction and vessel creation, but you can't expect me to help you for nothing. You need to cooperate with me in recording all experimental data about yourself." "No problem." With the basic deal struck, Kate actively stepped forward and petted the white porcelain cat's head. Saul had been watching the white porcelain cat's movements the entire time. This time, Saul finally sensed again that strange fluctuation he had felt on the airship. "What do you feel?" Saul quickly asked Kate. "It feels like I have a mouthful of water that I really want to spit out." Saul nodded and raised his hand to take out the dead wizard's diary. "Keep it in for now, don't spit." The diary began collecting information about the surroundings. Straight lines projected from the outside world onto the diary, becoming readable information. In this examination, Saul finally found a very hidden piece of information among the complex information lines. There's a curved, wavy line on Kate. This line is currently carefully avoiding other straight lines, and since there's already a lot of surrounding information, it's easily obscured, making people think there are no abnormal conditions at all. Then Saul casually made a die from nearby materials and had Kate and Herman compete in games of luck. At the same time, he had Kate spit out the water in his mouth. After playing more than 10 times, Kate was always the winner. During this period, Saul kept holding the diary, observing Kate's condition, and then saw that hidden wavy line affecting the dice. Because the force was so small and the speed so fast, Saul almost missed detecting its influence. "You can stop now." Sensing that the power on the white porcelain cat had changed, Saul immediately had Kate stop the dice game. Then he brought over a wooden basin from the inn and created some clear water to fill it. "Would you like some water to drink?" Kate walked over reluctantly. "Lord Saul, although I look like this now, I still prefer drinking from cups." "Washing your hands is fine too." Saul just wanted Kate to come into contact with water to test. Nathan had said the white porcelain cat brought not only good fortune, but also misfortune. The third-level apprentice Paul on the airship had warned him that people who touched the white porcelain cat all drowned. Combined with Crumb, who had mysteriously drowned in the frozen house, Saul concluded that when the white porcelain cat's power encountered water, it would produce new magical reactions. So he had Kate directly contact the water source. Although Kate had also heard about not being able to approach water, since he was a second-rank wizard himself and didn't know about Crumb's death, he wasn't particularly resistant to water. Knowing Saul wanted to conduct an experiment, he ran to the wooden basin and jumped right in. However, the seemingly rough bottom of the wooden basin was unusually slippery. After the orange cat jumped in, he slipped and fell flat in the water, with his mouth and nose submerged. Even more bizarre was that the water seemed to have autonomous consciousness, actively flowing toward Kate's mouth and lungs, completely ignoring the effects of gravity. Smack! Saul slapped the edge of the wooden basin. The basin didn't tip over, but the water inside suddenly returned to normal gravity, flowing back to the bottom with several splashes. Only then did Kate finally jump out of the basin, shaking the water from his wet fur. "There's something wrong with this water. As a second-rank wizard, I actually couldn't breathe in there." "Could you still cast magic then?" Saul asked him. "Yes, it's just that I thought such a little bit of water wasn't necessary." Saul nodded. "So even though you were drowning, you still had the power to save yourself. This is somewhat strange. If you had the power to save yourself, why did the third-rank wizard Crumb drown?" "Kate, what did you say?" Saul then told Kate about his deal with Ophelia at the White Glass Palace. "Since they both mysteriously drowned, I temporarily connected the two cases. Today, I saw wavy lines avoiding all straight lines on your body. It seems the white porcelain cat really is connected to Crumb's death." Before Saul could finish speaking, he saw pearl-sized tears squeeze out from the corners of the orange cat's eyes. "Woo, even third-rank wizards die, and you're still using me for experiments." Chapter 767, Nathan's Gamble. Despite having obtained the white porcelain cat from Nathan, Saul didn't abandon his substitute teaching position. Because after Kate tested the white porcelain cat's effects, the anomalies on the white porcelain cat disappeared again. From this, Saul judged that the power capable of affecting third-rank wizards wasn't inherent to the cats themselves. These separately sold white porcelain cats should only serve as a kind of medium. And the other end of the medium most likely still resided with Nathan. So in the second week, Saul continued substitute teaching. But Nathan didn't come that day. Presumably, he was studying the locator modification plan Saul had given him. Saul wasn't in a hurry either. He continued with his plan, daily introducing new knowledge that didn't exceed the curriculum but was generally inaccessible to regular apprentices, shocking them a bit, scolding them into bowing their heads to think seriously without daring to disturb him casually, then researching his own matters. During this period, Saul also visited the White Glass Palace, once to study with Ophelia how to establish a passage to communicate with the prismatic world. Ophelia also asked about Saul's investigation progress. Although she could see where Saul was, she couldn't see clearly what he was specifically doing. Saul simply told her he had leads and was investigating. Ophelia nodded and continued concentrating wholeheartedly on researching communication with another world. 2 weeks later, An apprentice from Saul's class actually returned to prepare for advancement to true wizard status. Although the lecture hall wouldn't reward Saul for this, the apprentice said before leaving that if his advancement succeeded, he would definitely pay Saul a substantial teaching fee. Saul didn't lack money, but the Purity Wizard Tower did, so he didn't refuse. The day after this happened, Nathan finally returned. He directly approached Saul after class, saying he had something to discuss. Nathan looked exhausted with reddened eyes, as if he hadn't slept for several days. Saul knew his bait had worked. Now the fish had taken the hook and was hesitating whether to spit it out. The two returned to their usual tavern booth. "What do you want to discuss with me?" Nathan across from him took 2 deep breaths, then suddenly stood up. "Instructor Saul, I hope to formally become your apprentice." "Oh," Saul leaned back leisurely. "After modifying your locator, you should be advancing soon, right? Is it appropriate to seek me as a mentor now?" "Actually, I've already discovered it." Nathan was very nervous, his clenched fists white at the knuckles. "You're not a first-rank wizard or even a second-rank wizard." Saul showed no embarrassment at being exposed, but he was still somewhat curious. "How do you know I'm not first-rank or even second-rank?" He had hidden a small trick in Nathan's modification plan, something only second-rank wizards and above could typically accomplish. He wanted to see if Nathan could confirm this through the white porcelain cat's power, or if there were other entities behind him. Because a first-rank wizard's understanding of locators couldn't reach your level, and while the information you left could be done by second-rank wizards, to do it as effortlessly as you did would probably require third rank. A third-level apprentice, no matter how knowledgeable, couldn't possibly know these things. Who told you? It was the water god who told me," Nathan shouted with determination. After speaking, he seemed to lose all his strength, swaying and nearly sitting down. Water god? Someone still dares to call themselves a god before wizards nowadays. Saul curved his lips, remaining composed. Seeing Saul's demeanor, Nathan seemed to gain courage. "The water god is actually the white porcelain cat's main body, and the white porcelain cat I sold you was just a fake. But because it was once stored together with the main body, it gained some of the main body's power. So there's a main body. The fake you gave me can at most affect first-rank true wizards. Its effect on second-rank and above wizards is pitifully small. What can the main body accomplish? Can it kill third-rank wizards?" Nathan was frightened by Saul's words. Kill third-rank wizards? Did Saul think he had come to harm him? "No, no, no, Instructor Saul, I have no malicious intent in coming to you. In fact, the water god I mentioned is also in a sealed state. Otherwise, he wouldn't have approached me." "You're saying this water god is in a sealed state? So you're secretly giving white porcelain cats to airship attendants to sell, who then sold them to different merchants. This was also the water god's instruction." Nathan was stunned. He realized that while he had come to confess to Saul, the other party already knew what he was going to confess. Did his surrender still have meaning? Thinking this, Nathan could only try to provide more useful information. "Yes, although the water god didn't say explicitly, I think his spreading white porcelain cats outward should be to break through the seal. It's just that this matter is too dangerous. If discovered, it might reveal the water god's existence. So I've always only had them target ordinary people." Nathan probably never imagined there would be such a bored third-rank wizard as Saul, who would actually ride airships meant for ordinary people. "You're too cautious. How much power can you accumulate using ordinary people? When will your water god break through the seal?" "Occasionally, I also secretly sell to wizard apprentices. If they resell later and it traces back to me, I can push it onto the airship merchants." Hiding yourself in a circle so you won't stand out and be discovered. Saul quite admired this third-level wizard apprentice. The water god had him help sell white porcelain cats, so he first sold these cats to ordinary people. After the supply spread out, the origins of the white porcelain cats in his hands became difficult to trace. Others would find it hard to think he was the real supplier. Moreover, that so-called water god wouldn't gently request Nathan's help. He must have used rather forceful methods. And Nathan choosing to reveal everything to him. "You want me to help you escape the water god's control?" Nathan nodded. Though his face showed fear, his eyes were determined. "The water god is already urging me to spread white porcelain cats to true wizards. But once I do that, no matter how careful I am, I'll be discovered sooner or later. When wizards learn I sold them white porcelain cats that bring death disguised as lucky charms, they definitely won't spare me. But if I don't do as the water god says, he can drown me with my own saliva anytime. So after realizing I'm actually a third-rank wizard, you came to confess voluntarily. You want to become my apprentice and offer the water god as tuition. You've guessed everything." Nathan clasped his hands tightly together. "I know this might displease you, but I'm at my wit's end and can only gamble." He raised his head, staring intently at Saul. "I'm betting that you disguised yourself as a first-rank wizard to come to the lecture hall because of me, because of the water god behind me." Chapter 768, Falling into the Sea. After hearing Nathan's all-or-nothing gamble, Saul looked at him with renewed respect. According to Saul's plan, Nathan should have investigated and verified Saul's purpose, gradually built a relationship with him, then slowly revealed his predicament. But Nathan had only hesitated for 2 weeks, or perhaps even less time, before deciding to tell Saul everything. Quite bold, though it might also be that the water god was pressuring him too intensely. But regardless, he had saved Saul a lot of time. "In that case, let's go meet this water god directly." Nathan was both surprised and delighted. He hadn't expected Saul to immediately decide to meet the water god. If even a third-rank wizard wasn't a match for the water god. Nathan only vaguely considered this question, before quickly shaking his head to stop himself from thinking deeper. Since this was a gamble, once the bet was placed, he couldn't back out. Nathan hurriedly led the way for Saul, carefully asking as they walked, "Instructor Saul, may I call you master now?" This was asking whether Saul agreed to take him as an apprentice. Saul considered seriously for a moment. "You may call me master, but only during my time in Sky City." Nathan was stunned, clearly not expecting Saul to add such a condition. However, he currently had no qualifications to negotiate. He only paused briefly before nodding quickly. "All right, master." Afraid that Saul might change his mind again. Sky City had no rule against residents going out at night, but nighttime security was indeed inferior to daytime. If one went out at night, they were responsible for their own safety. Nathan would normally be very careful when going out at night, and wouldn't leave the areas where wizard apprentices were active. But today was different. He walked ahead of Saul, not even watching the road. Instead, Saul kept observing their surroundings. He needed to rule out whether anyone else was interfering with Nathan's approach this time. All the way to Nathan's dormitory building, Saul detected no traces of others watching. Nathan's dormitory was quite ordinary. He even shared the same small building with another apprentice. "Aren't you afraid your roommate will discover your secret?" "My roommate often sleeps in the lecture hall." Nathan smiled bitterly. "And even if he discovered it, he'd only think I bought imitations. If he really became suspicious, he'd be the unlucky one." "How so?" "The previous one stole my things and took it as well. Later, while drinking beef soup, he drowned." As they spoke, the two arrived at Nathan's second-floor dormitory. An apprentice's dormitory actually served as their private laboratory, but they were responsible for the room's security themselves. When Nathan activated the magical formation on the door, Saul discovered this formation was mainly about deterring gentlemen, not preventing villains. Of course, as Nathan had said, if villains entered, they'd probably become dead villains. Nathan's room was simple. Upon entering, one could see the entire wall covered with parchment and a super long table surrounding 3 walls. The table was cluttered with items, but Saul immediately spotted a white porcelain cat placed beneath the windowsill. This white porcelain cat's eyes were also red, but compared to the imitation's red, this cat's eyes were more translucent, as if inlaid with crystals. Nathan followed Saul inside and immediately shut the door tightly, activating the soundproofing formation. He pointed at the white porcelain cat Saul was observing and whispered, "It's right there, but don't touch it after you approach. Anyone other than me who touches it will be immediately cursed." Saul nodded. Facing a water god capable of killing third-rank wizards, he naturally wouldn't be too reckless. Just as Saul took a step forward, he suddenly heard Nathan shout from behind, "Master, be careful." Saul had been constantly monitoring the diary's reactions. Could Nathan's surrender contain other intentions? Could there be traps behind the confession? But before Nathan's warning, the diary hadn't shown any abnormal lines. So Saul, temporarily having no target to guard against, was not only watching the white porcelain cat ahead, but also keeping an eye on Nathan behind him. However, the next second, the ground beneath his feet gave way, and his entire body actually began falling downward. Accompanying the fall was the sudden sound of gurgle gurgle, bubbling in his ears. In the blink of an eye, Saul had somehow moved from Nathan's bedroom to pitch-black waters where he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. Saul opened his mouth and water immediately poured into his throat, salty, bitter, and fishy. It was seawater. The seawater seemed to have autonomous consciousness, trying to invade his mouth, penetrate his organs, and soak into every alveolus in his lungs. For a moment, he forgot his identity and instinctively flailed his limbs in panic like a normal drowning person. But the bone-chilling seawater provided him with no buoyancy at all, seeming only to want him to sink in complete darkness. The more Saul struggled, the deeper he sank in this pitch-black sea. In a place he couldn't see, at the deepest part of the seabed, a white cat stared up at the person above with red eyes. Seeing Saul sinking rather slowly, the cat flicked its tail. A whirlpool immediately formed in the seawater, pulling Saul to accelerate his descent. Watching Saul in the water gradually stop struggling, the white cat frowned and flicked its tail again. The whirlpool grew larger. Saul sank another 3 or 4 meters in almost the blink of an eye. The distance between them was now less than 100 meters. It was at this moment that a voice suddenly appeared in the white cat's ears. "Strange, you don't seem to be like the outside rumors suggest, that you drown everyone who prays to you for good luck." The white cat froze, immediately changing from its previous crouching position to standing, looking up at the rapidly descending person above. Saul, who had been pretending to be a corpse, twisted his waist to change from back down to face down, though his eyes remained closed. In such an environment where nothing could be seen clearly, Saul didn't need to open his eyes. He spread out his mental power and sensed the white cat's presence below and its recent actions. After seeing him make drowning motions, the other party had still controlled the seawater to accelerate his descent. This action was actually completely unnecessary, but the other party had still accelerated twice, clearly more eager for Saul to quickly reach its presence. However, after Saul stopped pretending, the cat at the seabed didn't respond. Clearly, Saul had already sensed the other party's mental power, but the other party wasn't communicating with him. But looking at the cat's appearance, it had definitely heard Saul's words. Saul looked at the mental power feedback, thought briefly, and didn't rush to continue his descent. Although he had indeed experienced drowning reactions when first entering this pitch-black sea, a third-rank wizard's mental power could easily sweep through his body, restoring normal function to his out-of-control mouth and nasal cavity. At the same time, he sensed a mental power transmitted from the seabed. This mental power stirred the seawater, circling around Saul and carrying him downward, but throughout the process, it neither attacked nor restrained Saul. Saul suddenly realized that what had been attacking him and trying to drown him was only the seawater, not the source of the mental power below. Sensing the seabed's spiritual entity drawing ever closer, he couldn't help but form a new idea. Perhaps the power that grants people luck and the curse that drowns them don't come from the same source. Chapter 769, The Sealed Water God. Gurgle, gurgle. The bubbling sound accompanied Saul throughout, until his feet touched something hard and uneven. Before Saul stood the source of the spiritual entity that had just pulled him down. He still couldn't see anything, only reaching forward to explore by touch. Soon he felt something soft and furry. Even in the ice-cold seawater, he could sense the smoothness of the other party's fur. The other party nudged Saul's palm with its head, and he immediately felt a pair of small ears. "This texture really is a cat. I've been quite fated with cats lately." Saul smiled, transmitting his mental power through his arm. "Hello, are you the water god?" The small cat rubbed up and down against Saul's palm as an answer. The other party's spiritual body was very active, yet couldn't transmit information. Even direct contact can't enable mental power communication. Or do ancient water gods not know how to speak? But as long as they were intelligent races, even if languages didn't match, they could directly exchange information through spiritual bodies. Saul had previously suspected the seawater would block communication between them, which was why he waited until he sank to the cat's side before trying to transmit information through physical contact. But the other party was responding to him with body language. This meant the water god before him was probably being suppressed even more severely by the seawater. He couldn't even communicate through mental fluctuations. He can stir seawater but can't speak. Is it because he can't perform more complex mental power operations? It seems things are different from what I thought before. This water god is living quite miserably. Having grown accustomed to petting the orange cat recently, Saul unconsciously patted the water god's cat head twice. The small body beneath his palm immediately stiffened. He was probably encountering someone who truly treated him like a cat for the first time. Perhaps when wrapped in seawater, the other party cannot communicate directly. Saul felt the seawater pressure and the chill enveloping his entire body. I didn't sense spatial teleportation power in Nathan's dormitory earlier, so this isn't a real seabed. It should be a mental world sealed outside the water god's spiritual body. So to communicate effectively with the water god, I must exchange with him more directly, without touching seawater. After thinking, Saul patted the water god's small head again. "Water god, I'll take you somewhere, a place without seawater. If you have something to tell me, don't resist." The cat beneath his palm didn't move randomly, seemingly agreeing to Saul's proposal. 1 second, they were still soaked at the seabed under tremendous water pressure. The next second, one person and one cat fell from midair onto a massive circular stone platform. The white cat, deprived of vision for countless years, immediately dilated its pupils until they nearly filled its entire eyeballs. He incredulously touched the platform beneath his feet, then raised his head to survey the mysterious darkness around them and the twinkling stars within that darkness. "What is this place?" The white cat spoke with a human voice for the first time. It was a very pleasant male voice, but the numbness and weariness in it couldn't be ignored. Like a centenarian with still young vocal cords. This is my consciousness platform. Saul temporarily escaped the high-pressure deep sea, exhaled, and sat cross-legged directly. I never imagined a third-rank wizard could have such a powerful and vast consciousness platform. No wonder you could temporarily pull me from that place. The white cat honestly expressed his amazement. Saul looked at the white cat across from him. Thanks for the praise, though I never imagined ancient water gods looked like this. The white cat very humanly retracted its paws, looking at its own claws. This certainly isn't my original appearance. I was previously from the Azure Scale clan, though I suppose people of your era have never heard of the Azure Scale clan. He lowered his paws again, sitting proudly. Enough about that. Since you've successfully established a communication channel with me, I'm willing to give you an opportunity to receive the Water God's blessing. Water God, tell me, what do you want? Saul, tell me, what do you want? Water God, both saying the same thing simultaneously, left the Water God somewhat confused. Saul rubbed his chin. You wanted to pull me to the seabed before I drowned. Didn't you have something to tell me? Seeing the Water God didn't immediately answer, Saul muttered again. This is my first time meeting a god. Honestly, it's quite different from what I imagined. I thought beings who dared call themselves gods in ancient times would at least reach 5th rank wizard level, but looking at you, calling you 3rd rank would be generous. The white cat's straight back curved slightly. According to your current power classification system, I was once equivalent to a 5th rank wizard, but back then we called ourselves gods. As for now, you can see I'm sealed at the seabed. Saul nodded. This matched Wizarding World legends. Before wizards flourished, gods were merely equivalent to powerful wizards. This water god before him should have mastered water element control to near perfection to be called a water god. But near didn't mean actual perfection. Otherwise, how could a water god be trapped at the bottom of a sea full of water? Having roughly figured out the other party's identity and condition, Saul decided to address business first. I'll speak first then. Water God, I came to find you mainly to ask if you've drowned any 3rd rank wizards recently. You came just to ask me this question, the Water God asked incredulously. He felt he might have been sealed too long, and could no longer see through outside wizards' thoughts. So many people desperately sought him for good fortune, yet this person came just to ask about finding someone. A person who had already drowned. This is just the first question, but I need to decide what to do next based on your answer. The white cat's whiskers twitched, seemingly displeased with Saul's straightforward attitude. While saying 3rd rank seems familiar, he secretly glanced at the formations inscribed on the circular platform beneath his feet. Saul observed every movement, sighing lightly, Water God, please don't harbor designs on my consciousness platform. I'd like to communicate normally with you. The Water God didn't care that Saul saw his small movements, even asking back, oh, what is not normal? Despite various circumstances reducing him to 3rd rank strength now, with his 5th rank consciousness, he didn't believe Saul would be his match. He'd been sealed at the seabed so long, and now unexpectedly entered a 3rd rank wizard's consciousness space. If he could seize this consciousness space, couldn't he use this wizard's body to leave that godforsaken place that sealed him? With freedom at stake, he had no choice but to wrong this small wizard before him. Seeing the Water God's cat-like expression, Saul knew the other party wouldn't give up easily. He didn't want to summon the starry eyes. That would make him lose his sanity, becoming irritable and bloodthirsty, unsuitable for normal communication. Fortunately, he now had another choice. If you really want to know. Semi-transparent threads suddenly emerged from Saul's body. More and more threads appeared, growing denser. They seemed about to completely cover Saul, transforming him into a tangled, twisted ball of threads without intersections. But just then, Saul stopped changing and returned to his original appearance. Because the water god across from him now crouched on all fours with claws digging into the ground, back arched high, fur standing on end. Just like a real white cat, missing only a terrified meow. Death Demon. Saul. Chapter 770, the non-existent second half of the biography. Seeing the water god's terrified appearance, Saul felt both satisfied and wary. His current appearance was identical to those intelligent beings from the prismatic world. They had once claimed that ranks 1 through 6 were all them. But Saul's concept of fifth rank was still very vague, so he wasn't clear what the prismatic world intelligent entities who could freely switch between first and sixth rank meant. However, seeing his goal achieved, Saul immediately changed back from his tangled fate-lined state to his original human form. The water god, who had been bristling with fear, only managed to calm down somewhat after seeing Saul return to his original appearance, resuming his crouched position, though his paws still stepped uneasily. After the last thread retracted into his body like slurping noodles, Saul remembered to ask, "What is a death?" "Please don't say it," the water god immediately interrupted, speaking rapidly. "Please forget what I just said. I've been sealed for hundreds of years and sealed stupid. You couldn't possibly be. If you were, no, you couldn't possibly be." Seeing the other party's incoherent speech, Saul already knew what he was talking about. Could it be that ancient wizards called those intelligent entities from the prismatic world death demons? That name doesn't sound very welcoming. Saul found it strange. When those fate lines communicated with him, they seemed quite friendly. "Please don't think randomly either," the water god spoke again. "Otherwise you might attract unknown attention." "All right." Saul decided to set this matter aside for now, business first. "So you agree to communicate properly with me now?" "Of course." This time the water god agreed very readily. "Good, time is limited. Please answer my earlier question." Having brought a water god into his consciousness platform, the maintenance time was limited. Saul needed to speed up communication. "I've seen one," the water god recalled quickly this time, "but he wasn't really drowned by the deep sea." Saul him. When he had just died, his soul was hooked into the deep sea. If you want to know something, you can ask him directly. Urg, 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 the dignified water god dry-heaved for quite a while. Tui. He spat out an irregular gray ball covered in mucus from his mouth. Looking carefully, it wasn't a ball at all, but clearly a person curled up with legs drawn up, back arched, head buried between knees, arms tightly hugging his shins. It's been a while, but he should still be able to communicate. Saul raised his hand, controlling the gray figure curled into a ball to float before him. However, this figure couldn't communicate as the water god claimed. Tightly hugged into a ball with face barely visible, he showed no concern for his situation. If not for his hands and feet occasionally twitching, one wouldn't be able to tell he still had consciousness. The water god sat quietly across from Saul, offering no suggestions. It seems after calming down, he's starting to suspect I was deliberately pretending to be some death demon to scare him. Though Saul had indeed intentionally displayed a form similar to the prismatic world. To intimidate the greatly weakened water god again, and prevent him from harboring ill intentions and causing trouble, Saul directly took out his diary and pressed it onto the gray soul ball. When he lifted the hardcover book again, the soul entity in the air had disappeared, and the diary now contained one more black page. Next, Saul interrogated the black page right in front of the white cat. "Who are you?" "I am Crumb. This is a very mysterious space. I've actually regained consciousness. Though I seem to be under someone's control, are you my new master?" It really was this person. How did you die? While researching the advancement method in the water god's biography, I couldn't control the conflict between my magical power and mental power, and was polluted by the knowledge in the biography. So I'm already dead. A third-rank wizard daring to peek at my advancement method. What is that but seeking death? The water god across from him sneered coldly. Regarding Crumb's cause of death, Saul had already anticipated it. The other party secretly researching the water god's biography in a frozen room certainly wasn't just for enjoying stories. Since he dared risk learning 4th to 5th rank advancement knowledge, he should have been prepared to die from the book. Saul continued, "Why did your soul appear here?" "I know this one," the white cat water god actively said. He should have prayed to me for good luck before studying, which allowed him to smoothly interpret the knowledge I left behind, though he couldn't withstand the knowledge's additional pollution and died. At that time, the deep sea's curse also took effect. With his consciousness out of control, he was drowned by his own saliva. Ali, looking at the 6 dots on the black page, Saul could also sense Crumb's speechlessness. A dignified third-rank wizard wouldn't die from the water god's curse alone. Being polluted by the water god's knowledge wouldn't necessarily kill him so quickly either. But he happened to encounter both combined. Just as he lost consciousness from pollution, he died on his own saliva, without even a chance to call for help, dying as a laughingstock. Saul silently mourned for Crumb for half a second, then asked the most crucial question. Where is the second half of the water god's biography? What second half? Unexpectedly, Crumb, who should have been forced to answer questions by the diary, asked Saul back. The water god across from him also flicked his tail. You're actually looking for the second half of my biography. Saul sensed the consciousness platform's remaining time was running short. Ignoring the water god, he pressed. The second half of the stone tablet Ophelia gave you to research, or whatever other form it took. Where did you hide it? If you're talking about what Sky City's master gave me to research regarding the water god's biography, then I can only say she would never let anything related to the water god's biography leave her sight. So every time I studied, I memorized the tablet's contents and returned to the frozen hut to research in my mind. No item. Who was lying? Ophelia or Crumb? When the restricted target was a third-rank wizard, could the Black Page's ability have loopholes? At this moment, the circular platform in the consciousness space began trembling slightly. Saul suddenly turned to ask the water god, "Do you know where the second half is?" Despite the platform shaking, the water god cat sat steadily. "Of course I know. The second half of the stone tablet was destroyed by me the moment I advanced to 5th rank. Don't you need to review the knowledge? Actually, the second half was just my fantasy about advancing from 5th to 6th rank. At that time, my progress was smooth and I was arrogant, thinking my advancement method could lead directly to 6th rank. But after my promotion, I immediately realized how ridiculously wrong I was, so naturally I wouldn't keep it as a joke. In fact, besides me, no one else should know that biography had a second half. Because I wrote the biography myself, the white cat said calmly. The next second, heaven, earth, and stars spun rapidly. Saul closed his eyes and exited the consciousness platform. He was back in the deep sea, feeling pressure from all directions. In the darkness, he felt a fluffy tail brush across the back of his hand. The next second, Saul opened his eyes. He was back in Nathan's dormitory. At this moment, Nathan, after warning him to be careful, had just taken his first step forward. Chapter 771, Completion. This time, the communication with the water god was brief, with both parties initially probing each other's limits. But it didn't matter. Once Saul's spiritual body recovered stability, he could chat with the water god again. After all, the white porcelain cat's main body was right before his eyes. Saul walked straight forward and picked up the white porcelain cat from beneath the windowsill. He intended to store it in his storage device, but discovered the cat's main body couldn't be placed in spatial tools at all. He instead tucked the white porcelain cat inside his wizard robes and turned to Nathan, who had no idea what had happened. "You don't need to help the water god distribute his replicas anymore. Suddenly, I feel this guy is quite narcissistic." Is it all resolved already? Nathan had no clue what had occurred. Being enslaved by the genuine water god, he had just noticed the water god could somehow affect Saul from a distance, so he immediately warned the other party to be careful. But his warning was still echoing in the room when all the strangeness suddenly vanished, as if the previous unease had been merely his imagination. Saul walked back to Nathan's side and patted his right shoulder. Nathan immediately felt the water god's mark that had bound him for years disappear completely. He showed a relaxed and delighted smile, finally confirming that Saul had completely solved the water god problem for him. "Since you've fulfilled your obligation, I'll honor my promise as well." As someone who used causality theory, Saul naturally valued his commitments highly. "I probably won't continue substitute teaching, so let me see your current study progress." The next afternoon, Nathan wobbled out of his dormitory looking for food. His roommate happened to be on the first floor and was startled by his appearance. "What happened to you?" Nathan, sporting dark circles under his eyes, silently glanced at his roommate. "My brain isn't quite sufficient. I'm going out to see what I can eat to supplement it." His roommate had never seen Nathan in such a state, staring blankly as he drifted past like a ghost. Saul had actually left Nathan's dormitory early. He had stuffed Nathan with a pile of knowledge, explained it only once, then left him to ponder and understand it himself. It couldn't be helped. Nathan had always been clever and had Luck's assistance, but lacked drilling ability. This slightly advanced knowledge would help him catch up. Meanwhile, Saul returned to the inn at dawn and saw the orange cat sleeping soundly in the room. "There's quite a difference between cats." He shook his head and sat at the long table. He took out the white porcelain cat from his robes and placed it on the table. "This water god is currently in a sealed state. He controlled Nathan because he wanted to use good fortune as bait to disperse the deep sea's curse until he could break free. But judging from Saul's experience visiting the deep sea, it was unclear how much longer the water god would need to break his seal through this method. Perhaps by the time he got out, the world would already be destroyed by the abyssal eye. The water god's later cooperation might not have been without thoughts of asking Saul to help him break the seal. But should he help him? Saul hadn't decided yet. Before advancing to 4th rank, Saul wasn't confident his causality theory could restrain a 5th rank wizard. Although the water god currently only had 3rd rank strength, who knew if he understood some high-level knowledge that could escape causal entanglement? Moreover, Ophelia's attitude remained a mystery. After thinking, Saul decided not to let the water god out to cause trouble for now, to avoid affecting his cooperation with Ophelia. Next, he took out his diary and directly extracted the 4 consciousness entities from it, keeping only the black pages containing Narella and Pear. Saul then completely tore off the black page containing Crumb, severing its connection to the diary. The other party transformed from a page back into a gray soul entity curled into a ball. After Saul gained complete control of the diary, he could completely separate souls from black pages, just like the operation of returning Kismet's remnant soul. Looking at Crumb floating in the air, unconscious once again, Saul said to the others, "Next I'll go find Ophelia and deliver Crumb's soul to her. I just don't know why she mentioned a non-existent second half of the water god's biography. Perhaps this time she'll tell some truth." Agu stepped forward. Master, could Sky City's master be trying to stall you with this excuse? Stall me for what? Saul temporarily had no clues. Forget it, we know too little about Ophelia. We can only wait until we meet her. During this time, you should work together and walk around, see if you can learn more about Sky City and Ophelia. The consciousness entities nodded one after another. Saul turned to the orange cat. Stop pretending to sleep. Next, just play yourself and visit the famous Academy of Knowledge and Academy of Practice here. See what knowledge they're seeking and what they're practicing. When almost completely ignorant about Ophelia, excessive speculation was meaningless. It would only lead to being caught between advancing and retreating. Once my consciousness platform recovers, I'll chat with the water god again. Saul had only told Agu, Anne, Herman, and Penny about the pentagram matter. Bate had observed hints of the truth herself. Others didn't know that besides contacting Peyer in the prismatic world, Saul had come to find Ophelia to construct the second vertex of the pentagram. Saul had originally wanted to place the second symphony of fate on Ophelia. But Saul also knew Ophelia was different from Shea. The other party didn't have a weakness of depending on Saul to survive. So this time, Saul wanted to play the Symphony of Fate secretly. Such a large-scale magic would definitely need an even larger magic to cover it. Connecting to the prismatic world was the perfect opportunity. Although Ophelia's attitude was unclear, and she had already dug an unknown pit for Saul regarding the water god's biography, he hadn't given up yet. After resting for 2 days and returning to optimal condition, Saul took Crumb's soul and once again headed to the White Glass Palace to visit the 4th-rank wizard Ophelia, the city master. This time, Saul was still led by Ona and met the beauty in the bottle, Ophelia, in the main hall. You actually found Crumb so quickly. Ophelia's beautiful head emerged from the white porcelain bottle and flew before Saul, trailing a long, winding neck. Less than 3 weeks. Even if I went to find him personally, I might not be as fast as you. It seems you really are extraordinary. No wonder Kismet was willing to acknowledge you as master. Mentioning Kismet was somewhat awkward, since the other party had betrayed and played tricks on Ophelia. But looking at Ophelia's appearance, she didn't seem to care at all. He wondered how Kismet had managed that. Let me see Crumb quickly, Ophelia urged. Saul took out a small bottle with gray mist floating inside. When he removed the cork, gray mist emerged and gathered into a small person curled into a ball. His condition isn't very good. Halfway through speaking, Saul was interrupted by Ophelia. No matter. Ophelia smiled and swallowed Crumb's soul in one gulp. Chapter 772, Repeated Probing. Having devoured Crumb's soul, Ophelia contentedly returned to the bottle opening, half closing her eyes as if savoring the experience. Saul didn't know whether Ophelia could directly read the memories in Crumb's mind. But even if she discovered that Saul had interrogated Crumb, it didn't matter. After all, when Crumb was in the book pages, he couldn't actively receive external information. At most, Ophelia would know that Saul had already discovered there was no second half of the biography. After a moment, Ophelia opened her eyes. You completed this commission very well. Now we can discuss how to contact Peyer in the prismatic world. The other party completely avoided mentioning the second half of the biography. Could it be that, when she originally asked Saul to investigate Crumb's cause of death and the second half of the biography, it was just to buy time? No, it wasn't that simple. About the second half, Saul actively brought it up. Don't believe the words of a traitor, Ophelia said softly. Since you brought back his complete soul, I can naturally excavate the secrets he was hiding. The other party obviously wouldn't tell Saul the truth. Saul smiled and sighed. All right, I won't worry about this matter. It doesn't really concern me anyway. The two moved past this topic and continued discussing the connection issue. I've looked at the plan you gave me. It's indeed feasible, but also very risky. How can you guarantee that during the connection process we won't be attacked by external forces, and whether the prismatic world will use Pear as a springboard to attack our world? Seeing that Ophelia had genuinely considered the connection issue, Saul began discussing it seriously with her. After half a day of discussion, Ophelia and Saul preliminarily determined two connection schemes, but which one to ultimately use would need to be decided in subsequent research. Next, the two would prepare for the first test connection. Before leaving, Ophelia suddenly called out to Saul, "By the way, leave Pear with me." Saul's departing steps paused, then he slowly turned back. "What does your excellency want Pear's remnant spirit for?" Ophelia said unhurriedly, "In both our schemes, I need to fuse my power into Pear's mental strength to help her break through the world barrier's isolation. I naturally need to coordinate well with her. I thought your excellency and Pear were sisters, so the coordination step wouldn't be too troublesome. Heh, for thorough preparation in experimental research, I don't do things carelessly in this regard." The other party's sudden request to keep Pear, though reasonably explained, made Saul feel Ophelia had other reasons. However, thinking of the diary, he still didn't refuse. Saul raised his hand and directly extracted the combined entity of Pear and Narella from his temple. "Pear stay by Ophelia's side during this time," Saul instructed. "No," the left head on the combined soul entity shook frantically. "I don't want to stay with the old witch." "Wait, isn't the old witch yourself?" Saul secretly shook his head, then said to the Sky City Master, who was smiling with narrowed eyes on the high platform, "Pear is a remnant spirit, so I had Narella protect her, but they're in soul form after all, without bodies." Ophelia interrupted, "You don't need to worry. I'm very skilled at creating vessels." As soon as she finished speaking, a white porcelain bottle to Pear's left made the sound of boiling water. Then white bubbles emerged from the bottle mouth. The bubbles gathered higher and higher, then flowed down along the bottle's rim. The foam accumulated on the ground, piling up bit by bit like squeezed cream. Then the cream began writhing and transforming, bulging left and right, gradually becoming a palm-sized white figure. No facial features, and the body was just a simple outline. But when Saul examined this vessel, he found the white figure inside was very suitable for containing souls. This instantly shaped figure was already superior to the human body vessel Saul had spent over half a year creating at Gorsa's Wizard Tower. Truly worthy of the city master who possesses countless avatars, Saul wanted to take this figure back for research. Narella looked at the figure on the ground that didn't even reach her knees, feeling somewhat uneasy. Seeing Saul's signal, she could only suppress her nervousness and walk toward the white figure. Pear on her left was still shaking her head desperately, not wanting to enter the vessel Ophelia had created. Unfortunately, in this combined soul, she wasn't the one in control. After Narella crouched down and touched the white figure, she was directly absorbed into it. The wooden figure then became lively, looking at its hands, lifting its legs, adapting to the new body. 5 features also grew on the figure's round head, just a few holes. Narella, Master, Pear, HMPH. Saul raised his hand to pick them up, but before his hand touched the figure, it suddenly jumped backward to avoid him and turned to run toward Ophelia on the high platform. "Master, this body moves by itself and isn't under my control," Narella cried out in panic. Saul didn't pursue but stood up to ask Ophelia, "Your Excellency, Pear and Narella are staying to coordinate with you. Please don't overly restrain them." After speaking, Saul secretly mobilized the diary's power, and finding he could still easily recall both souls, relaxed, though his expression remained serious. Heh, don't worry, I won't eat them. This is just to ensure they don't run around. Sure enough, the white figure stopped upon reaching the high platform and was again controlled by Narella. Well then, you should go back first. I'll have Ona escort you. From now on, you can find her for any needs. Ophelia suddenly emphasized the words, any needs. Saul nodded, took one last look at Pear and Narella on the high platform, then left the main hall. Outside the main hall, the sunlight was dazzling. Wizard Ona stood in the sunlight. Strikingly, she wasn't wearing her black wizard robes, but had changed into a dark green court dress, decorated with obsidian at the collar and hem, making her skin appear white as snow. Wizard Saul, Ona smiled brilliantly. Saul suddenly understood what Ophelia meant by any needs. However, the other party hadn't mentioned providing this kind of service before. Why the sudden seduction today? Although Saul and Ophelia were currently in a cooperative relationship, both had their own calculations. Facing such an opponent, Saul had no interest whatsoever, not even the intention to play along to deceive his opponent. Hello, Wizard Ona, I'll head back first. Ona quickly approached. She wasn't deliberately displaying her charms, but she was naturally beautiful, and with her bright smile, she looked like a summer flower. Wizard Saul has worked hard for the city master these days. Why not come to my residence first for a couple drinks to relax? Saul shook his head. I don't drink. Not alcohol, Ona smiled behind her hand. Cream soup. Saul still shook his head, turned and walked away, casually waving his raised arm. No thanks, I'll go back and drink water instead. Chapter 773, Covert City Lockdown. He rejected you. After the flying carriage took off, Ophelia in a blue dress lifted her skirt and climbed the stairs from one side onto the platform. Ona said somewhat awkwardly, I'm sorry, City Master. I failed to complete your assignment. Ophelia stepped forward and pinched Ona's fair chin. That shouldn't be right. In terms of looks, you're not inferior to Pear. Ona's face reddened slightly. Perhaps Wizard Saul really likes your sister. Ophelia released Ona and sneered. Talk about feelings with a wizard. I'd rather believe he has no interest in even venting basic instincts with you. Ophelia walked to the platform's edge, placing one hand on the parapet. But since he's already a third-rank wizard, reduced interest in physical matters is normal. Her index finger lightly tapped the stone, making thump-thump sounds. He was only second rank when he was with Pear, while Pear was already a veteran third-rank wizard. Ophelia smiled, tilting her head to let the breeze blow through her hair. Perhaps he prefers psychological pleasure. Ona's face stiffened behind her. City Master, you wouldn't. How could that be? Ophelia paid no attention to Ona's emotional changes behind her. The more she thought about it, the more interested she became. This Saul's body must contain some kind of secret. Ever since Pear got together with him, there's been a shadow in her spiritual body that even I can't probe. And this shadow must be the fundamental reason she could survive outside the Stargate. She suddenly turned around, her long dress tracing a sharp arc in the air. I'm extremely interested in him now. Before I obtain his secret, no one is allowed to let him leave Sky City. You must hold him here tightly. Ona immediately knelt down. Yes, I'll think of every possible way. Also, I'll continue working hard to gain Wizard Saul's favor. Please give me another chance. Only then did Ophelia glance at Ona, the smile disappearing from her face. Go. Ona breathed a sigh of relief. Yes. Also, send a message to Kismet saying I have matters here. Tell him not to come for now. We'll discuss it again in half a year. Yes. Saul still didn't know that due to Pear's situation, Ophelia was already coveting his body. After returning to the inn, the first thing he did was call back the consciousness entities who had scattered. Any discoveries today? Agu had been gathering intelligence in the apprentice area. Apprentices here attend school for free until becoming third-level apprentices, but they need to pay for or prepare their own magic crystals and magical materials. After becoming third-level apprentices, they can work and live in the outer city area. It's said many third-level apprentices work at the airport and on airships. Those with good talent or money to continue their studies keep learning at the lecture hall or go to the Academy of Knowledge and Academy of Practice. As long as they pass assessments, they can continue studying there. However, both academies have very high requirements for apprentices. Only those with outstanding talent get admitted. After hearing Agu's introduction, Saul immediately felt Sky City was like a university town. What about first-rank wizards? Most first and second-rank wizards are in the two academies. This was Bate speaking. Being originally a third-rank wizard, she was safest exploring the Academy of Knowledge and Academy of Practice for intelligence. The deans of both academies are third-rank wizards, but there, mostly high-rank wizards lead low-rank wizards and apprentices in experiments. Moreover, apprentices there don't have easy lives. Bate crossed her arms. This place is different from Baton Academy, we genuinely taught, but they're more like using apprentices as unpaid servants and test subjects. I bet the death rate of apprentices and low-rank wizards here is definitely higher than what they publicly announce. This place is a big melting pot, Bates sneered. Herman looked around and raised his hand. I discovered something at the airport. Everyone looked at him. The airport seems to be under martial law. What happened? Several people died on an airship, including supposedly a small princess from another faction. Now, to investigate the murderer, all airship traffic has been suspended. Anne continued. Actually, before the deaths, airships had already started restricting entry and exit. I saw the wizard apprentice who was on the same airship as us near the lecture hall. He seems to have been unable to leave Sky City and is trying to earn money. Saul rested the back of his hand against his chin. People who came on the same airship as us still haven't left. It seems this port closure has a 50% chance of targeting me. A4. Bate frowned, her expression not looking good. Could Wizard Ophelia not want you to leave? Wouldn't our coming here be walking into a trap? Don't panic yet. Saul remained relatively calm. From current appearances, she doesn't plan to directly detain me openly. Her roundabout way of blockading Sky City shows she doesn't want me to notice. If I'm not mistaken, she'll definitely use other methods to trip me up next. Saul said to the others, since that's the case, we need to prepare early too. From now on, you temporarily don't need to return. According to my assignments, covertly set up auxiliary formations. Agu looked worried. But Master, Ophelia might harm you. Do you still want to choose her as the second one? Let's see first. It's currently unclear what exactly Ophelia wants to do, but preparing early is never wrong. Only then did Agu nod. After everyone left, Saul sat alone in the room, unconsciously beginning to stroke the white porcelain cat on the table. If Ophelia won't work, the pentagram must choose someone else. In places ordinary people couldn't see, Sky City's atmosphere began growing tense. Saul continued teaching at the lecture hall as usual. Now, the number of third-level apprentices had increased rather than decreased. This wasn't because Saul's apprentices failed to advance. On the contrary, 3 apprentices from his substitute class had successfully advanced to true wizard status. This success rate had already shocked other instructors and apprentices. Everyone knew the lecture hall had gotten a very capable substitute instructor. Some third-level apprentices who had given up on advancement signed up for classes, hoping to seize this opportunity and become the next apprentice to advance to wizard status. One day a month later, Paul was dragged to class by a friend who also hadn't attended the lecture hall for a long time. He didn't really want to attend, not because he didn't want to advance, but because he'd brought his daughter Mina along on this guard mission. As a result, during this period when Sky City only allowed entry but not exit, he'd been unable to send his daughter back to their hometown. Sky City wasn't as wonderful as it appeared on the surface. Paul didn't even feel safe leaving Mina alone in their rental room. But now his landlord, the good friend who dragged him to class, had his sister accompany Mina, so Paul finally had time to go out alone. His friend Nero enthusiastically introduced, "I heard that new instructor used another student as an example in class a week ago, directly modifying his locator to be incredibly powerful. He's already gone back to prepare for his advancement ceremony. Ah, if only he could use me as an example today." Paul kept looking back. Though he maintained a gloomy expression all day long, he was very concerned about his daughter. "I'll only attend one class with you, then leave after it ends." Really, ever since having a daughter, you're completely unfit to be a wizard. A true wizard should be like Instructor Saul, rational and proud. Paul's head-turning motion froze. What instructor? What's his name? Chapter 774, The Returning Instructor. Paul followed his friend Nero to sit in the second-to-last row of the classroom. This was the default ranking of strength among apprentices. Nero continued muttering beside him about hopping to be the lucky one chosen today, but Paul didn't hear a word. He knew the name Saul wasn't particularly common, but it wasn't impossible for people to share the same name. However, when he first heard this name, he somehow thought of the passenger Saul on the airship who had remained completely calm despite being interrogated. But at that time, he was clearly just an ordinary person. Even the airship's detection equipment hadn't found any abnormalities on him. Could this new instructor really be the same person as that traveler who had left such a deep impression on Paul? Just as Paul was struggling with these thoughts, the corridor suddenly fell quiet. "The instructor is here." The classroom instantly went silent. Everyone's eyes lit up. However, when the door was pushed open and everyone saw the instructor entering, they all widened their eyes with bewildered expressions. "What are you looking at? Disappointed it's not Wizard Saul." The person entering was actually the class's original instructor. His face was gloomy as his gaze swept over everyone, seemingly in a bad mood. If anyone dared to get caught by him at this moment, they'd receive a harsh lesson. The apprentices in the classroom immediately suppressed their disappointment and surprise, sitting properly. But not all apprentices feared the instructor. The apprentices in the back row visibly frowned with disappointment. "Can't Instructor Saul come today?" The wizard on the platform's mouth twitched. "He's already been recruited by the Academy of Knowledge. You won't need to think about him anymore." Thump, thump, thump. A series of short, forceful knocks suddenly interrupted the platform wizard's words. The next second, Saul actually walked in from outside. The wizard on the platform looked toward the door with displeasure. "Who are you?" Saul walked unhurriedly to the platform. "The instructor for this class." The other party scanned Saul from head to toe, though he wanted to casually say, "So you're Saul," thinking that the other party had been actively recruited by the Academy of Knowledge while his own application had been rejected. He forced out a smile. "So you're Wizard Saul. Did you leave something here?" Saul knew this was the original instructor he had been substituting for, but currently his purpose for teaching here was no longer just to approach Nathan, so he couldn't let this original instructor return yet. Saul leaned over and whispered a few words in the other's ear. The man opened his mouth, unable to speak for a long time, then suddenly reacted at a certain moment and hurriedly gathered his things from the platform. "All right, no problem at all. Thank you so much. I'll have to trouble you with these apprentices from now on." As if afraid Saul might change his mind, He clutched his books and quickly walked out of the classroom. This left a classroom full of apprentices, both bewildered and delighted. They had thought they'd never be able to attend Saul's classes again. Only Paul, looking at Saul casually leaning against the platform, had a completely blank mind. At this moment, he suddenly saw Saul look up and make eye contact with him, giving an almost imperceptible nod. The morning passed quickly. Saul continued explaining locator-related knowledge to the third-level apprentices according to his own pace. During this time, some people boldly asked other questions, which he answered by selecting parts that didn't exceed the curriculum. For these apprentices, certain deep knowledge couldn't be casually learned without corresponding talent or comprehension abilities. After class, Saul was first approached by Wizard Laura. "Wizard Saul, why aren't you going to the Academy of Knowledge? I've never seen anyone refuse recruitment from the Academy of Knowledge." Wizard Laura looked shocked, but unconsciously softened her tone when facing Saul. "It's not that I'm not going, it's just that while teaching these apprentices, I suddenly discovered that my previously overlooked knowledge and understanding have been completed. I'm currently in a stage of mutual verification with the apprentices. Once I complete this stage, I'll report to the Academy of Knowledge." Laura still felt it was a pity. For wizards like them who might be forever trapped in the lecture hall, the Academy of Knowledge was such a longed-for existence that they had to pretend not to care on the surface to maintain their self-respect. After dealing with Wizard Laura, Saul waited for Paul. Paul had actually wanted to sneak away, but seeing Saul when leaving and thinking of Mina living with him, he steeled himself and approached. "Instructor Saul." Saul smiled and invited Paul to walk together. "Don't worry about what happened on the airship. In fact, I should thank you for reminding me about the cat's gratitude." Paul wasn't good at flattering people and could only remain silent and shake his head in such situations. So Saul continued speaking. "You're attending classes now. Don't you need to work on airships anymore? Recently, airships haven't gotten port departure permits." "Really? It's been over a month now and you still can't leave port. Did something go wrong?" "I'm not sure either." Looking at the uneasy Paul, Saul stopped walking. "Where's your daughter?" Paul immediately became nervous but could only answer, "She's staying with me at a friend's house." "Don't be so nervous." Saul didn't know what terrible scenarios this guy had imagined in his head. His face had gone pale. "You helped me once, so if you have any questions during future classes, you can ask directly." However, Paul said, "Instructor Saul, in the future I might not attend classes anymore." "Afraid of me?" Saul raised an eyebrow. He considered himself the most approachable and kindest instructor in the lecture hall. At least he hadn't made anyone vomit blood yet. "No, no." Paul waved his hands frantically in denial. "Third-level apprentices need to pay fees for classes. My airship work is currently suspended and Mina is with me." "I understand," Saul comprehended. Paul's daughter, little Mina, should have pretty good mental power talent. If she could successfully live to age 10 and pass tests, she might become an even more capable wizard than her father. Paul was right to hide her carefully, to avoid being captured by some desperate wizard and raised as magical material. However, compared to Mina, whose specific situation couldn't yet be determined, Saul valued Paul's abilities more. "But your talent shouldn't stop at third-level apprentice. If you don't have time to attend classes, you can wait for me outside after class. I can spare you 10 minutes. Paul gripped his hands tightly, appearing expressionless but actually in a daze. Saul smiled and, regardless of what the other party was considering, walked away directly. After walking quite far, Penny asked in confusion, "Brother Saul, why did you suddenly decide to continue teaching? Weren't we planning to set up an auxiliary formation at the Academy of Knowledge?" Saul strode forward, leaving wind and crowds behind him. The auxiliary formation will be set up, but there's no rush, as long as it's completed before the experiment connecting to the prismatic world. Teaching here is a backup plan I'm preparing for another guy. Penny thought for a moment. You mean the water god? Chapter 775, 6th and 7th rank. Returning from the lecture hall, Saul entered the inner city where only true wizards of Sky City could reside, and turned into a quiet alley. The parapets on both sides of the alley were planted with pink and white whisper flowers. They bloomed and withered and bloomed every day, demonstrating their vitality from head to toe. Saul no longer stayed at the inn, but had rented a uniformly sized two-story building here using his first-rank wizard identity, personally setting up basic magical formations inside and out. During this time, he had basically confirmed that Sky City was covertly under lockdown. Although some people could still leave, they had to pass through careful screening. Those not permitted couldn't even take out a single message. Saul hadn't personally tested whether he could leave Sky City. He still had important matters and didn't really want to leave Sky City. Moreover, this was a bottom line. If he personally tested whether he could leave and was refused, the fragile balance of interests between him and Ophelia could easily be broken. Even if the other party would still help him connect to the prismatic world due to causality theory's influence, what their relationship would become afterward was uncertain. Since he couldn't leave Sky City in the short term, Saul couldn't keep staying at the inn. So with Nathan's introduction, he moved to this small building. After returning to the building, the first thing Saul did was find the water god for a chat. It had been a month since his last communication with the water god. Now he was confident he could pull the water god into his consciousness platform again. And being prepared this time, the consciousness platform would last longer than before. However, when Saul saw the white cat again, he discovered its mental fluctuations were considerably weaker than during their last meeting. What happened to you? The white cat had originally been lying on the ground, but immediately resumed an elegant sitting position when Saul approached. Nothing much, just that there haven't been any sacrifices these days, so my condition isn't very good. Since Saul had taken away the white porcelain cat's main body, Nathan had suspended distribution of the replicas. Lacking souls to help the water god offset the deep sea's curse, he could only endure it himself, naturally exhausting his spirit. Saul hadn't properly examined the water god's condition before, so this time he directly stepped forward to check. The cat-like water god was initially somewhat wary, but suddenly remembering Saul's display of transforming into tangled curves, he ultimately didn't move randomly. After examining him, Saul stepped back 2 paces. The seal on you is extremely powerful. No wonder it manifests as a deep sea in your consciousness world. The water god shook his head. Actually, this seal was originally more terrifying, but after over 100 years, it's been weakened by time. I only gained the ability to sense the outside world a dozen years ago, and only in recent years found ways to offset some of the curse to make the seal break faster. Saul simply sat on the circular platform, facing the white cat. Aren't you a water god? Why were you sealed, and with a deep sea of all things? Using water to seal a being calling itself a water god was quite forceful mockery. Don't call me water god anymore. My real name is Floco. Thinking of the reason for his sealing, the white cat's back curved slightly, then straightened instantly. Actually, I was crossing a stargate when I accidentally offended another 5th rank. I had just advanced then and was arrogant, so I was directly defeated in a few moves. My main body was destroyed, my spiritual body nearly annihilated. The enemy left my consciousness and sealed it in the deep sea just to humiliate me. When Floco spoke of these things, his tone was calm with some sense of release. These matters had weighed on his heart for hundreds of years. The original anger and excitement had already dissipated. Speaking them to Saul actually brought a touch of relief. After hearing Floco's story, Saul felt chilled. You're both fifth-rank wizards. Are those outside the Stargate really that much more powerful than you? The higher the rank, the greater the power gap between those of the same rank. You're not fifth rank yet, so you don't understand. Actually, the minimum requirement for fifth rank is being able to cross stargates with one's own power and travel between worlds. As long as you can do that, you're fifth rank. But among fifth ranks who can achieve this, the power difference might be greater than that between apprentices and fourth rank wizards. So many people, even with fifth rank strength, are unwilling to cross stargates for fear of encountering my situation. The power gap between fifth-rank wizards is actually so large. Saul suddenly became curious about what requirements reaching sixth rank would have. He thought that when Floco was alive, this wizard world probably hadn't been sealed yet. So perhaps he knew what high-rank wizard strength should be like. So Saul directly asked. Floco wasn't surprised. Everyone would be interested in peak power levels. Wizards were especially curious beings. Although you're only third rank, well, there's no harm in telling you. A fifth rank being can advance to sixth rank once they can completely destroy a world. Note, completely destroy. Killing all humans on continents doesn't count. It's said that the most powerful sixth ranks can directly disintegrate a world just by adjusting a fundamental rule. Tisk, Saul couldn't help clicking his tongue. As for seventh rank, in my time, they were called creators. They can independently create a world. That's quite similar to popular mythology stories. Floco continued, quite ironic, isn't it? A sixth rank must destroy worlds while a seventh rank creates them. Saul nodded, but there's logic to follow. Wizards are like that, pursuing knowledge, learning knowledge, understanding knowledge, mastering knowledge, questioning knowledge, and finally using knowledge to create knowledge. Floco stared at Saul in a daze. You sound like a wizard when you say that. Didn't I before? Saul asked with a smile. Do I need to say what you seemed like before? Water god, Floco muttered internally, though he didn't want to mention that term again. Finally having some understanding of power beyond fifth rank, Saul considered for a moment and brought up another matter. Floco, at your previous pace, how long would it take you to break the seal? The white cat's tail swayed leisurely from left to right. Probably several hundred more years. Trying to drain the sea with a small spoon, how easy could that be? But I've been imprisoned for hundreds of years already, so I'm not anxious anymore. As long as people outside still have thoughts of praying for luck, they'll naturally send me sacrifices. Fourth-rank wizards were basically immortal beings. Hundreds of years meant even less to fifth-rank wizards, but if possible, who would want to be trapped in a cat's body? Saul leaned forward, arms resting on his knees, revealing a tempting smile. Floco, draining seawater is difficult, but causing a tsunami sometimes only requires one big explosion. Have you considered escaping this way? Floco looked up at Saul, his cat eyes holding a solemn, finally here expression. Of course I've considered it, but where I'm sealed I'm just a cat who can't even speak. Besides transmitting some lucky power, I can't do anything else. Saul patted his knee. But now you've met me, haven't you? The white cat slowly nodded with a slightly ingratiating tone. Yes, after hundreds of years, this lucky ability has finally reflected back on myself. Chapter 776, Test Connection. Saul helped Floco analyze the situation. Now, every time you transmit luck to people in the outside world, they help you share part of the deep sea's curse. This curse will quickly take effect and cause them harm, but as long as they're careful to avoid it, people outside won't necessarily die. Having grown accustomed to teaching during this period, Saul had a small blackboard rise from the ground behind him on the circular platform. Chalk-textured images appeared on the black surface, automatically demonstrating the scenarios Saul described. Currently you're sealed and can use very little power, but there's one force you can utilize, the deep sea curse that's currently sealing you. Usually these curses either suppress you or backfire on those who received your luck. If someone receives your luck but the deep sea's retaliation doesn't affect the corresponding person, it will create a force opposite to its original direction. I've thought of this method too, but I can't suppress the curse from retaliating. So I'll try. Having been sealed for hundreds of years, Floco had tried every method to escape without success. Though Saul was now proposing a solution, he didn't hold much hope. How will you try? I'll attempt to use a special method to redirect the retaliatory force back to your vicinity. As he spoke, a semi-transparent thread emerged from Saul's fingertip, moving through the air like a living earthworm, gradually extending toward Floco. Gulp! Seeing this thread again, Floco's throat moved twice. Of course, he didn't need to swallow saliva, but for some reason, he particularly wanted to make this motion right now. You want to connect this thread to me? Saul had already begun moving. No, I'm condensing it around you to turn it into a bomb. Do you know what a bomb is? Ugh. I'll be careful to adjust the angle properly, trying not to let the explosion affect you. But to send the seawater sealing you from the seabed to the surface, the power definitely can't be small. More and more threads had begun wrapping around Floco, and most terrifyingly, he had no way to resist. If this were the former water god, even if he didn't want to provoke a death demon, he could completely try to escape. But now he was bound. And he was bound and brought to this place, the death demon's lair. Since he could no longer resist, Floco decided to fight for more power for himself and figure out Saul's purpose. Helping me like this, what do you want in return? Saul cupped his chin, sitting listlessly. Haven't decided yet. Well, I haven't thought it through yet. He switched to the other hand. However, the legend of the cat's gratitude should make a comeback. If we don't collect enough cursed power, how can we stir up a tsunami? A month after leaving Pear with Ophelia, the other party finally sent Saul a message saying they could conduct the first test connection. Of the consciousness entities, Saul only brought bait, leaving the others to continue wandering outside. Since the experiment connecting to the prismatic world was still a secret between just Saul and Ophelia, only the two of them were at the test connection experimental site. This test connection experiment would last about half a month, so blue-dressed Ophelia directly brought Saul to another location more suitable for experiments. Beneath the main hall of the White Glass Palace was a spatial teleportation formation. This place was guarded by two giant-like beings. When Saul followed blue-dressed Ophelia past the two guards, their eyes didn't move, but their nostrils kept pointing toward the two of them. You can stand in the very center. Ophelia pointed to the circular ring in the formation center. This is a spatial teleportation formation. I don't know if you've used one before. Saul rubbed his chin, not telling her that he had one beneath his wizard tower for emergency escapes. He walked into the formation and stood ready, signaling to blue-dressed Ophelia that he was prepared. Seeing Saul's practiced manner, Ophelia knew he understood spatial teleportation formation operating principles, so she went to the side and activated the switch. The next second, the entire formation emitted dazzling white light, covering Saul's vision. When the white light faded, Saul found himself in a place filled with billowing white mist. Even with his vision, he couldn't see through the white fog to anything 3 meters away. Saul raised his hand and waved it in front of him twice. His arm movements carried weak magical power, forming a gentle breeze. But the breeze passed through the white mist, as if passing through a curtain made of metal chains, completely unable to disturb the white fog. seems to be a magical tool deliberately used to block vision. Since there were no further instructions, Saul temporarily stayed in place without moving randomly, but he turned around, preparing to observe his surroundings as much as possible before someone came to receive him. Just as he turned around, the surrounding mist suddenly became much thinner, and scenery more than 10 meters away finally penetrated the fog and entered Saul's vision. This, looking at the enormous object behind him, Saul was so shocked he momentarily couldn't speak. Behind him stood an incredibly massive mechanical device, completely at odds with Wizard's magical style. Huge gears were connected by equally massive chains, pipes thicker than people crisscrossed, weaving through what appeared to be steel-made supports, like giant pythons moving through a primeval forest. The highest pipes expelled white smoke outward, with railings at the pipe openings like jagged snake fangs. "How do you find the mechanical heart?" Ophelia's voice came from behind Saul. "Very spectacular," Saul sincerely exclaimed. "Heh, you're the first person to see the mechanical heart without questioning its connection to magic." A human head emerged from the mist, followed by a neck that disappeared into the fog. No body was visible, nor was Ophelia's white porcelain bottle found. "I'm more inclined to believe different forms of power will ultimately converge at the same endpoint. If you're very interested, I can help introduce you to the mechanical heart's principles." "Thank you. Perhaps next time," Saul pointed around. "Will our experiment be conducted here?" "The first time will be here." Ophelia smiled, not minding that Saul had declined her offer to introduce the mechanical heart. Her head circled around Saul once. "Don't move around carelessly here." Ophelia directly extended her head to the mechanical heart's side, using her teeth to bite down on a nearby control lever. The already rotating massive machinery began rumbling loudly with high-frequency vibrations. The mist that had originally filled the entire room suddenly began moving, forming a white fog wall around the spatial teleportation formation where Saul stood. The elemental particles disappeared. Saul was startled and immediately released his internal magical power, then sensed that the elemental particles carried in this magical power were rapidly absorbed by the surrounding fog. Soon, the area within the wall became a magical vacuum zone. Only then did Ophelia's head slowly return. However, unlike flying through the air before, this time she crawled back using her neck support against the ground. "Now we don't need to worry about other interference. We can begin." Chapter 777, Test Connection 2. Saul quickly understood why Ophelia went through such trouble to create a magical vacuum zone. Without interference from external elemental particles and various other radiations, Wizard experiment data could more closely approach theoretical values. This was a magical vacuum that couldn't even be achieved in the Chaos Realm, where black tides were all inert. Here, all magical power would be provided by wizards and magic crystals, ensuring data accuracy to the greatest degree possible. Subsequently, Saul began setting up the magical formation under the gaze of Ophelia's single head. This formation was an improved version he had used in his wizard tower. Although Saul had failed several times connecting to the prismatic world, he believed his formation design approach was correct. This was also confirmed by Bate, who was also a third-rank wizard. After 2 hours, Saul completed setting up his mental power connection formation, then stood up and looked toward Ophelia standing to the side. "I'm ready on my end. Now we need Pear to come over." Ophelia opened her mouth. Her tongue was like a frog's tongue, originally coiled in her mouth cavity. But after extending out of her mouth, it unrolled circle by circle, spitting out a white figure. The white figure lay lifelessly on the ground. After a few seconds, its hands and feet began twitching. Finally, it sat up abruptly, opening a pair of eyes like black holes. "Ah, bastard, you actually threw me to this old witch." Upon seeing Saul, the white figure immediately waved its arms and charged toward him, though its hands and feet were soft like a doll's, making its running posture quite comical. Saul glanced at Ophelia. The other party wasn't angry about being called an old witch and continued smiling as she watched the two. He lowered his head and first asked Narella, "Narella, how are you two doing?" After the white figure ran to Saul's shin, it stood gracefully. "We're fine, master. Lady Ophelia has been adapting to Payer's mental power. It's just that Payer isn't very happy." With the diary's connection, Saul could sense that Narella wasn't lying. Since Narella currently shared a soul body with Payer, she also clearly felt Payer's emotions. As the one in control, she could even slightly control Payer. This was also why Saul had left Narella behind. "Finished inspecting the goods, let's begin now." Amid Payer's angry "who's the goods" voice, Saul placed the white figure in the left half of the magical formation and stood in the corresponding right half. Already familiar with the formation's principles, Ophelia didn't need Saul's reminder and automatically positioned her head at the third key point located at the formation's edge. Sensing the three people's powers beginning to merge under the formation's influence, Saul raised his hand and pointed, igniting the magic crystals around the formation from a distance. Black flames immediately began burning on the magic crystals, accompanied by crackling sounds. Large amounts of magical power poured into the formation, transforming the originally unremarkable, roughly drawn formation into patterns as precise as those drawn with the finest measuring tools. In the formation's startup light and shadow, Saul looked toward one corner of the formation, then imperceptibly shifted his gaze away, as if he had just been checking the formation's operational status. But that corner actually hid another formation Saul had drawn beneath the main one, the Symphony of Fate. However, Saul wasn't activating this hidden formation now. After all, this was only the first test connection. He needed to first confirm the possibility of connection. Most importantly, he hadn't decided yet. More and more magical power boiled within the formation. Though there was no water vapor, the air was twisting and deforming as if affected by powerful radiation. When the entire formation's potential energy reached the maximum, Saul extended his hands toward Payer and Ophelia respectively. Thin threads extended from his palms, connecting straight to both of them. This was Ophelia's first time seeing Saul cast this type of magic. She looked down at the thread with interest, but resisted the urge to play with it using her tongue. On the other side, Payer was quite accustomed to the thread's existence. To quickly contact the Payer in the prismatic world, and also to quickly escape the old witch. This time she didn't complain but very actively began the mental power connection. Receiving Payer's signal, Saul closed his eyes. The world became quiet before him, transforming into a deep universe with only a few points of starlight flickering in the unreachable distance. Soon light gradually appeared around Saul, because around him were several transparent, faintly glowing threads. These threads belonged to Saul's patients one by one, belonged to his friends and companions, belonged to each person whose fate was connected to his. But here, there should originally have been another thread. That one belonged to Payer. Only now, although Saul could still faintly sense his connection with Payer, he could no longer see Payer's fate line. Beside him, Payer's remnant soul timely transmitted her mental power fluctuations. Saul received her fluctuations and made his own mental power fluctuations infinitely approach Payer's. At this moment, the other fate lines around Saul faded away, and the surroundings became pitch black again. However, Saul also needed this darkness. Only in extreme darkness would the light produced by the distant Payer be obvious enough for Saul to capture her signal again, across the distance of several worlds. But even after Saul and Payer's remnant soul synchronized their mental powers, he still couldn't find the same signal in the darkness. Just like every previous time. After a simple search, Saul sent out another signal. Subsequently, a massive mental power like a huge wave directly covered Saul's head. Saul and Payer's mental powers were like small sailboats sailing on the ocean. A strong wind came from behind. Though it made their sailing speed faster, it nearly broke their masts. Saul's face instantly turned pale, gritting his teeth. He barely managed to maintain the stability of his and Payer's mental powers, not falling apart under the impact of this newly joined mental power. A fourth-rank wizard's mental power, truly terrifyingly strong. This was also Saul's first time directly experiencing the gap between himself and a fourth-rank wizard. When he was still a second-rank wizard facing third-rank wizards, he hadn't felt such powerlessness. He still had the consciousness battlefield as a trump card to fight. But facing fourth rank, Saul believed that even if he pulled someone into the consciousness battlefield, that battlefield would probably be immediately submerged by the giant waves of the opponent's powerful mental power. Indeed, the higher the rank, the greater the gap between levels. Saul exhaled, steadying his mind and not letting himself overthink due to the power difference. At this moment, the terrifying mental power that had been like a hurricane suddenly weakened. Though still very powerful, it at least no longer had that world-destroying, terrifying momentum. Saul could finally successfully borrow the other party's power and began sailing in the vast mental power universe, searching for the prismatic world's coordinate signal. After an unknown amount of time, the mental power universe remained dark, and Saul's mental power could no longer sustain itself. We can only go this far this time. Saul sent out a stop signal. Ophelia's mental power withdrew first. Only then did Saul open his eyes. His spirit returned to his physical body. Thud! The white figure in the formation's corner collapsed powerlessly on the ground. Master, Norella's weary voice came. Payer has fainted. Chapter 778, A Single Spark. You really plan to use the cat's gratitude. Paul looked disapprovingly at his good friend Nero. Nero took a deep breath, then slowly exhaled, feeling his chest change from burning hot to cool. He smiled bitterly. Paul, you know me. I'm already 35 this year. Although people of all ages have advanced to formal wizard status, if I can't advance before age 40, my mentor won't continue sponsoring me. Then I'll have to go to the Academy of Practice to do the most dangerous, consuming work to pay off my debts. Third-level apprentices who wanted to continue at the lecture hall or find a better mentor outside often needed to pay large amounts of magic crystals and resources. But not everyone had powerful backing or someone willing to sponsor their studies. In Sky City, wizard apprentices could obtain abundant resources and wealth by signing a certain contract. But simultaneously, if they couldn't advance to formal wizard status before the contract's stipulated time limit, they had to go to the Academy of Knowledge or Academy of Practice to do the most dangerous work. This was different from people who applied to the two academies. Many of those who went to do consuming work never returned. Even those who did return looked as panicked as if they'd narrowly escaped death. But without signing contracts, most apprentices had no opportunity to continue studying. Therefore, even though this contract had already consumed many apprentices' lives, every year many people still went forward to sign contracts one after another. All for that tiny possibility of advancing to true wizard status. Because in Sky City, first and second level apprentices couldn't live good lives either. Without reaching third level apprentice status, they had no qualifications for independent work. They didn't even have the right to abandon this lifestyle. Looking at his good friend, Paul could only remain silent. If he hadn't accidentally had his daughter Mina back then, he probably would have signed his name on the contract the Academy of Knowledge issued. For his daughter's sake, he couldn't take risks anymore and had permanently lost the opportunity to advance further. He opened his mouth, but still didn't mention the promise Saul had given him recently. On one hand, Saul might not like seeing him give his opportunity for help to someone else. On the other hand, hadn't Nero been attending Saul's classes all along without managing to advance? Paul closed his mouth, his face gloomy, looking like a terrifying murderer who might stab someone at any moment. Seeing Paul like this, Nero actually laughed. "Look, it's exactly this attitude of yours that makes others afraid to approach you." He patted his friend's shoulder. "Don't worry, recently people have already researched methods to avoid the cat's gratitude curse. I heard that several people who used it didn't have problems, and we're already third-level apprentices with some ability to resistance ourselves. You don't need to worry too much." Nero was comforting Paul while also comforting himself. "Once I get the method to avoid the curse, I'll tell you. Then you can try it too. Maybe you'll directly advance to true wizard." But Paul wasn't tempted at all and shook his head. "Forget it, I can't have anything happen to me." He still had his daughter. Sky City was still under martial law, making it very difficult to leave the city. He still hadn't managed to secure a spot. If something happened to him in Sky City, Mina would. He didn't dare imagine what Mina would encounter. Seeing his friend's mood grow even lower, Nero could only shake his head. "Fine, then I'll try it myself." Conversations like Nero and Paul's were happening elsewhere in Sky City. They mostly occurred among those with weak power, and since the curse hadn't even caused new deaths, it hadn't attracted attention from higher-ups at all. But sometimes, when weak forces accumulated enough, they could ignite a prairie fire. After the first test connection, although Saul hadn't found Payer's coordinates, he had confirmed their research direction was correct. Subsequently, both parties gathered to discuss improvement plans. Ophelia proposed attempting a second try after 1 month. Saul originally didn't want to delay so long, but Ophelia said the mechanical heart needed maintenance after each activation, requiring about a month. But Saul suspected the month-long time frame might just be Ophelia's excuse to delay him. He just had no way to refute it. After returning to the lecture hall, Nathan began following Saul's instructions, having the attendant, who was also forced to stay in Sky City and couldn't leave, let white porcelain cat replicas flow into the market. The attendant was just an ordinary person. Everyone knew he definitely wasn't the real mastermind, but because of this, no one knew the person behind the scenes was actually an equally unremarkable true wizard. That's right, under Saul's one-on-one guidance, Nathan had successfully advanced to first-rank true wizard. During this time, besides completing tasks Saul assigned, he spent all other time desperately studying, because he didn't know when Saul would leave Sky City. And once Saul left Sky City, probably no one else could guide his studies so precisely. Therefore, Nathan wished he could give up even rest time, wanting only to improve himself as quickly as possible. Another week later, Saul received a second invitation from the Academy of Knowledge. This time, after considering for a day, Saul finally agreed to take a position at the Academy of Knowledge. At the same time, he used this opportunity to secretly bring the white porcelain cat to the Academy of Knowledge. Gradually, this cat's gratitude legend that had only circulated among apprentices also spread among low-rank wizards. For true wizards, the cat's gratitude basically couldn't influence their research, but occasionally bringing some assistance was still possible. Moreover, after people researched methods to avoid the potentially drowning curse that came with the cat's gratitude, its side effects could be ignored. These crudely crafted white porcelain cats gradually became an affordable magical tool. Even some second-rank wizards would use the cat's gratitude before conducting experiments with high uncertainty to improve their success rates. Saul still maintained his first-rank wizard persona at the Academy of Knowledge, taking research topics from the Academy and passing them to the newly advanced Nathan, only occasionally giving him guidance when free. The newly advanced Nathan had to face difficult problems he shouldn't encounter at his current stage. This day, just after Saul submitted a report Nathan had ghostwritten to the second-rank wizard on his team, he was blocked by Wizard Ona at the Academy of Knowledge entrance. Ona looked at the Academy of Knowledge gate behind Saul, then at the wizard robes on Saul, saying with some resentment, "Wizard Saul, if you really like the Academy of Knowledge, the city master could also arrange a deputy dean position for you. Why mix among low-rank wizards?" There was no one else around Saul, or they would definitely be surprised at how Saul knew a wizard directly under the white glass palace. Saul shrugged without deliberately explaining, "I'm also verifying what I've learned." Ona still couldn't understand. Wasn't a third-rank wizard spending all day researching first-rank wizard topics a waste of resources? However, high-rank wizards generally had strange temperaments. Previously, Ona had thought Saul was so normal it was abnormal. Now seeing his preference for disguising as a low-rank wizard, she suddenly felt the other party was indeed worthy of being a high-rank wizard, capable of anything. Chapter 779, The Fuel Furnace. Although Ona couldn't understand Saul's hobbies, she wouldn't really interfere with him either. She also wasn't worried about Saul having any conspiracy by entering the Academy of Knowledge. In Ona's view, at least within Sky City, City Master Ophelia was an invincible existence. No one could scheme against her. Moreover, Saul's hobby was so harmless that Ona was happy to use this opportunity to get close to him. After all, she still carried the mission of approaching Saul. Thinking of this, Ona stepped forward to walk side by side with Saul. "Would Lord Saul be willing to share the knowledge you're verifying with me?" Saul didn't refuse Ona's approach either, chatting casually with her just like he would with other wizards of the same rank at the Academy of Knowledge. After all, Ona was a second-rank wizard. Although her daily work mainly wasn't responsible for researching various theoretical knowledge, when needed she could speak eloquently about multiple fields. So with Saul deliberately lowering his posture while Ona worked hard to stand on tiptoes to show herself, the two had a very pleasant conversation all the way. As they chatted, Saul gradually steered the conversation toward the mechanical heart. Wasn't the mechanical heart invented by City Master Ophelia? It wasn't, and this isn't a secret in Sky City either. The original mechanical heart was conceived by the current dean of the Academy of Knowledge, and through the combined efforts of the Academy of Knowledge and Academy of Practice, the design and assembly were finally completed. It was only after the first-generation mechanical heart came into being that City Master Ophelia invested massive human and material resources to establish the Academy of Knowledge and Academy of Practice to create more useful knowledge. Saul couldn't help but nod after hearing this. Actually, the two academies are places where brainstorming happens constantly, and they're places full of innovation, bold assumptions, careful verification. Ona smiled behind her hand. "It seems you really do like the two academies. Actually, if your status weren't so important, the city master would definitely hope you could stay in Sky City long-term. The research atmosphere here is very suitable for you." Was this subtly conveying that they didn't want to imprison him for a long time? Saul glanced at Ona, pretending not to understand the subtext of her words. "I also really like the research atmosphere here. It's just..." "Just what?" "It's just that low-rank wizards face considerable pressure here. Those who can't propose new research topics within a certain time are actually taken away for punishment. The penalty is even heavier than failing to complete report assignments. Ona was indifferent. After all, people are naturally inclined to laziness. If they can't inject fresh blood into Sky City, then why would the city master support these low-rank wizards to do repetitive and simple experiments? Saul didn't say much more, but steered the conversation back to the mechanical heart, praising the ingenuity of its design. Ona carefully shared all the information she could reveal, while secretly feeling pleased with herself. This Lord Saul liked to disguise himself as approachable and get along with low-rank wizards, so she abandoned her originally polite but distant attitude and changed to a more intimate and unrestricted approach, successfully drawing closer to Saul. Finally, the two walked all the way to the small building where Saul currently lived. Looking at the unremarkable two-story building before her, Ona stepped forward, carefully closing the distance with Saul. "Would Lord Saul mind if I went up to take a look?" Saul opened the door, stepped forward and entered first, then turned to Ona outside and said, "Let's skip the tour." Then he closed the door, directly shutting Ona, who had been chatting happily all the way outside. Ona's eye twitched, almost failing to maintain the brilliant smile on her face. Time passed bit by bit, and the white porcelain cats gradually transformed from cursed objects that could only circulate among a few apprentices into small-scale mass-produced magical tools that could be sold in the market. As the producers, Saul and Nathan actually earned quite a few magic crystals from this, with Saul taking the larger share. Soon, it was time for the third connection experiment. Ona welcomed Saul into the white glass palace with a resentful expression. During this time, she often appeared around Saul, working hard to build their relationship and seizing every opportunity to create ambiguous atmospheres. But she didn't know why. For wizards like them, physical pleasure was clearly just ordinary enjoyment like eating and drinking, so why wouldn't Saul touch her? Ona, who couldn't complete City Master Ophelia's assignment, naturally became more anxious day by day. "Lord Saul, the City Master requests your presence." Ona extended the invitation outside Saul's two-story building. "Wait a moment." Saul's voice came through the door crack. Before long, the door opened, and an energetic Saul walked out. "I'll escort you into the white glass palace." "Actually, Wizard Ona, you don't need to come pick me up every time. I completely know the way now." "Sigh, if you don't even let me come pick you up, what chance do I have to communicate with you? Being able to receive guidance from a third-rank wizard lord is such a joyful thing." Saul shook his head and smiled. "It's one thing for others to say this, but you're someone who often follows Lord Ophelia. How could you lack guidance from high-rank wizards?" Ona again showed a pitiful expression. "Don't you really know what I mean, Lord Saul?" Seeing Ona about to speak plainly, Saul simply kept quiet and refused to communicate. So the resentful Ona became even more resentful. Saul, with extremely strong stress tolerance, endured Ona's burning gaze as he passed through the spatial teleportation formation and arrived at the mechanical heart. At this time, one of Ophelia's heads was already waiting there. "Sorry to keep you waiting. I'll start setting up the formation now." Saul nodded to Ophelia, then was about to begin preparing the magical formation. However, today Ophelia stopped him. "After the previous two experiments, I discovered that the mental power I provided you wasn't stable enough. So today, I'm preparing to change methods. I won't provide mental power support to you anymore." Saul's movements paused, frowning disapprovingly. "But Lord Ophelia, besides you as a fourth-rank wizard, the power others can provide probably isn't sufficient to penetrate the Stargate's barriers." Ophelia patiently explained, "Don't worry, I'll still help you break through the Stargate's barriers. But the subsequent mental power simulation synchronization and mental power supplementation will be handled by the mechanical heart." Saul asked in surprise, The mechanical heart actually has such powerful capabilities. The one before your eyes naturally can't. Ophelia smiled, her head gradually retracting into the dense white mist. So today, I'll take you to see the real mechanical heart. Watching Ophelia disappear, Saul opened his mouth to ask something, but suddenly discovered the mist around him had dramatically thickened. The dense mist had almost become a solid gel. Standing in fog so thick he couldn't see his hand in front of his face, Saul actually felt terrifying pressure like the deep seabed. Then his feet suddenly gave way, and his entire body was squeezed down by pressure from other directions. When Saul fell from the white mist, he found himself in another room. The temperature here was very high, as if the air itself was about to boil and bubble. He rubbed his aching temples to clear his head. Opening his eyes again, he saw a massive steel furnace standing before him. The firewood in the furnace burned with crackling sounds. Waves of heat emanated from the furnace opening, almost burning Saul's skin. "This is the fuel furnace." Ophelia's voice came from overhead. "This is the core of the mechanical heart, and also the power supply core for all of Sky City." Saul raised his right hand, trying to block the heat waves from the furnace, but his eyes slowly widened after seeing clearly what the firewood in the furnace looked like. Burning in the fuel furnace were actually charcoal-black corpses. Those corpses emitted vigorous mental power and magical power while burning. Moreover, even though they had been burning in the fuel furnace for a long time, those corpse firewood showed no signs of diminishing. Everything indicated that what was burning in the fuel furnace were wizard corpses. Chapter 780. Return to the prismatic world. What kind of fuel is the best fuel? Efficient, clean, or renewable? Today was the first time Saul had witnessed someone using wizards as fuel. City Master Ophelia, although you're a fourth-rank wizard, aren't you afraid of suffering backlash from using true wizards' corpses to refine fuel? Saul's tone remained relatively calm, without righteous indignation. "You misunderstand, Wizard Saul. I didn't kill these people. They died from various accidents. I merely processed them, recycling waste." Ophelia's voice still came from overhead. She still hadn't appeared. Saul thought of the scene he'd witnessed when first arriving at Sky City. "The disappearing corpses I saw on the road were transferred here by the Whisper Flowers. What is this place? A group of people not worth reviving. What do they care what happens to their corpses?" Saul fell silent for a moment. The disappearance of corpses had become an accepted rule in Sky City. But those people probably never imagined what their bodies would ultimately become. If you have no other questions, let's begin the third connection experiment now. Saul shrugged. "Then I'll trouble the city master to activate the core." He vaguely guessed what this place was. This massive fuel furnace was probably the lower half of Sky City, wrapped in clouds. Ophelia said this was the core of the mechanical heart, but it should be more than that. The energy radiating from outside the entire fuel furnace was extremely powerful. This was probably the power source keeping all of Sky City flying in the air. For the sake of improving the connection experiment success rate, the other party hadn't hesitated to bring Saul to Sky City's core, which showed considerable sincerity. Following the previous experimental steps, Saul began setting up the magical formation. But this time, the formation's third core had to be placed on the fuel furnace. Since Saul didn't understand the fuel furnace well enough, he naturally couldn't properly connect it with the formation. However, after 2 experiments, Ophelia had completely mastered the formation Saul had set up, so she connected the fuel furnace's equivalent supply to Saul's formation. Only during the connection, Ophelia still didn't appear. Or rather, her head didn't appear. What appeared was a pair of pale, slender arms stretched 100 times longer. The arms had no eyes, but perfectly connected the formation with the fuel furnace. I'm ready on my end. Once the formation was complete, the arms directly detached, blown into the fuel furnace by an invisible wind, immediately igniting like silk paper and turning to ash. Today's Ophelia had a sense of isolation, as if she was unwilling to have any connection with Saul. Saul observed all of this without saying anything, only indicating he was ready. When the white figure containing Peyer and Nerella's souls also fell from overhead, landing precisely in the magical formation's corresponding position, Saul reminded, "Your Excellency, the formation still needs you to assist Peyer in channeling mental power. Do you still refuse to appear?" Ophelia's voice carried amusement. "After the previous two connection attempts, I believe the prismatic world is too dangerous and don't want to establish direct contact with that side." "You old witch." Peyer. After pacifying Peyer, who was about to curse, Saul waited for Ophelia's next words. He knew that although the other party was withdrawing midway, since she had specifically brought Saul here, she definitely wouldn't watch the experiment fail. Sure enough, Ophelia continued, "I've already separated out mental power and placed it on the puppet. After you activate the formation, it will complete the channeling in my place. So Your Excellency Ophelia plans to just observe throughout. I'll give you a hand when you encounter danger." Ophelia laughed charmingly. "Then thank you, we'll begin now." "Saul, you're agreeing to let her withdraw midway." Peyer was obviously still angry about Ophelia's sudden change of mind. Saul waved his hand, and the gesticulating puppet immediately quieted down. Seeing Nerella control Peyer, Saul didn't hesitate further and immediately activated the formation. Flames from the nearby fuel furnace suddenly show 0T out, flame tongues licking the formation on the ground without causing any damage. The formation touched by flames instead activated the magic crystals on it. The entire formation lit up bit by bit, finally converging at Peyer's position. Saul slowly closed his eyes, allowing the world to become pitch black. He skillfully touched Peyer's fate line beside him and guided it, exploring toward unknown directions, searching for another mental power in complete synchronization. Perhaps due to Ophelia's sudden change of mind, or perhaps due to the fuel furnace's powerful backup support, Saul had a mystical feeling that this time he could find the Peyer of the prismatic world. The fate line traveled through lonely darkness for an unknown duration, with only Peyer's stable mental power fluctuations accompanying Saul's consciousness, preventing him from losing his sense of time in the darkness. Finally, Saul suddenly felt a familiar fluctuation transmitted from some unknown direction, connecting with his fate line and forming the same frequency fluctuations as Peyer's mental power. "It's Peyer, it's the Peyer from the prismatic world." Saul's spirit lifted as he extended his fate line again. The other party's mental power seemed to become a lighthouse in the ocean, guiding Saul's direction. Finally, Saul sensed a semi-transparent thread appearing ahead, so conspicuous in the boundless darkness. Two constantly fluctuating curved lines worked hard to approach each other, transforming the space that could accommodate several worlds into a reachable distance. The next moment, Saul only heard a buzz in his brain, as if crossing temporal and spatial barriers to reach the world's end. He opened his eyes and began receiving information from the new world. This place was filled with constantly changing numerous colors. Even with Saul's current knowledge, he couldn't distinguish how many colors there were in total. This was the prismatic world, where first through sixth-rank intelligent entities coexisted. "Peyer." Saul tried to call out to Peyer. After all, the other party's mental power had guided him here. Perhaps the Peyer of this time had already awakened. However, what responded to Saul was another familiar voice. "You've come again." The twisted thread cluster of the prismatic world didn't seem surprised to see Saul again. Saul immediately respectfully transmitted his message. "Hello, may I ask if Pear has awakened?" The time she needs to awaken is not something the current you can understand. If you want to communicate with her as soon as possible, you can return here. This way, you can see the independent Pear before the next consciousness is born. The words of the prismatic world consciousness were somewhat difficult to understand. "I'm sorry, I don't plan to return for now." Then you shouldn't come here frequently. Each deepening connection will make your coordinates involuntarily slide toward us. Saul's heart tightened, and the thread cluster he had transformed into contracted into a small ball, as if wanting to use such a closed posture to protect his safety. But soon the thread cluster slowly scattered again, entering a dispersed state. "Perhaps someday I will return, but I hope that by then I'll have sufficient knowledge reserves to face this prismatic world."